Audiobook. The Nightland by William Hope. Chapter 1. Murdeth the Beautiful. And I cannot touch her face, and I cannot touch her hair, and I kneel to empty shadows, just memories of her grace. And her voice sings in the winds, and in the sobs of dawn, and among the flowers at night, and from the brooks at sunrise, and from the sea at sunset. And I answer with vain callings. It was the joy of the sunset that brought us to speech. I was gone a long way from my house, walking lonely-wise, and stopping often that I view the piling upward of the battlements of evening, and to feel the dear and strange gathering of the dusk come over all the world about me. The last time that I paused, I was truly lost in a solemn joy of the glory of the coming night. And maybe I laughed a little in my throat, standing there alone in the midst of the dusk upon the world. And lo, my content was answered out of the trees that bounded the country road upon my right. And it was so, as that someone had said, "And thou also," in glad understanding that I laughed again a little in my throat, as though I had only a half believing that any true human did answer my laugh, but rather some sweet delusion or spirit that was tuned to my mood. But she spoke and called me by my name, and when I had gone to the side of the road, that I should see her somewhat, and discover whether I knew her, I saw that she was surely that lady, who for her beauty was known through all of that sweet county of Kent as Lady Murdeth the Beautiful, and a near neighbour to me, for the estates of her guardian abounded upon mine. Yet until that time I had never met her, for I had been so oft and long abroad, and so much given to my studies and my exercises when at home, that I had no further knowledge of her than rumour gave to me odd time. And for the rest I was well content, for as I have given hint, my books held me, and likewise my exercises. For I was always an athlete, and never met the man so quick or so strong as I did be, save in some fiction of a tale or in the mouth of a boaster. Now I stood instantly with my hat in my hand, and answered her gentle bantering so well as I might, the while that I peered intent and wondering at her through the gloom. For truly rumour had told no tale to equal the beauty of this strange maid, who now stood jesting with so sweet a spirit and claiming kinship of cousinhood with me, as was truth, now that I did wake to think. And truly she made no ado, but named me Frank by my lad's name, and gave laughter and right to me to name her Murdeth, and nothing less or more, at that time. And she bid me then to come up through the hedge and make use of a gap that was her own especial secret, as she confessed, when she took odd leave with her maid to some country frolic, dressed as village maids, but not to deceive many, as I dare believe. And I came up through the gap in the hedge and stood beside her, and tall she had seemed to me when I looked up at her, and tall she was in truth, but indeed I was a great head taller, and she invited me then to walk with her to the house, that I meet her guardian, and give word to my sorrow that I had so long neglected to make call upon them, and truly her eyes to shine with mischief and delight, as she named me so for my amissness. But indeed she grew sober in a moment, and she set up her finger to me to hush, as that she heard somewhat in the wood that lay all the way upon our right. And indeed something I heard too, for there was surely a rustling of the leaves, and anon a dead twig cracked with a sound clear and sharp in the stillness. And immediately there came 3 men running out of the wood at me, and I called to them sharply to keep off or beware of harm, and I put the maid to my back with my left hand, and had my oak staff ready for my use. But the 3 men gave out no word of reply, but ran in at me, and I saw somewhat of the gleam of knives. And at that I moved very glad and brisk to the attack, and behind me there went shrill and sweet the call of a silver whistle, for the maid was whistling for her dogs. And maybe the call was also a signal to the men servants of her house. Yet truly there was no use in help that was yet to come, for the need did be then and instant, and I nowise loath to use my strength before my sweet cousin. And I stepped forward briskly, as I have told, and the end of my staff I drove into the body of the left ward man, so that he dropped like a dead man. And I hit very sharply at the head of another, and surely cracked it for him, for he made instantly upon the earth. But the third man I met with my fist, and neither had he any great need of a second blow, but went instant to join his companions, and the fight thus to have ended before it was even proper begun. And I, laughing a little with a proper pride, to know the bewilderment that I perceived in the way that the lady murdereth. My cousin stood and regarded me through the dusk of the hushed even. But, indeed, there was no time left to us, before there came bounding up 3 great boar-hounds that had been loosed to her whistle, and she had some ado to keep the brutes off me, and I then to beat them off the men upon the earth, lest they maul them as they lay. And directly there was a noise of men shouting, and the light of lanthorns in the night, and the footmen of the house to come running with lanthorns and cudgels, and knew not whether to deal with me or not in the first moment, even as the dogs. But when they saw the men upon the ground, and learned my name and saw me proper, they kept well their distance, and had no lack of respect. But indeed, my sweet cousin to have the most of any, only that she showed no intent to keep distance of me, but to have a new and deeper feeling of kinship than she at first had shown. And the men servants asked what should be done with the footpads, seeing that they were now recovering. But indeed I left the matter along with some silver to the servants, and very sound justice they dealt out to the men, for I heard their cries a good while after we had gone away. Now, when we were come up to the hall, my cousin must take me in to her guardian, Sir Alfred Giles, an old man and venerable that I knew a little in passing and because our estates abounded, and she praised me to my face, yet quaintly wise. And the old man, her guardian, thanked me most honourably, and with a nice courtesy, so that I was a welcome house friend from that time onward. And I stayed all that evening and dined, and afterward went out again into the home grounds with the Lady Murdath. And she more friendly to me than ever any woman had been, and seemed to me as that she had known me always. And truly, I had the same feeling in my heart towards her, for it was, somehow, as though we knew each the way and turn of the other, and had a constant delight to find this thing and that thing to be in common, but no surprise, save that so pleasant a truth had so natural a discovery. And one thing there was that I perceived held the Lady Murdath all that dear forenight, and this was, indeed, the way that I had my pleasure so easy with the 3 footpads. And she asked me plainly whether I was not truly very strong, and when I laughed with young and natural pride, she caught my arm suddenly to discover for herself how strong I might be, and surely she loosed it even the more sudden, and with a little gasping of astonishment, because it was so great and hard. And afterward she walked by me very silent and seeming thoughtful, but she went never any great way off from me. And truly, if the Lady Murdath had a strange pleasure in my strength, I had likewise a constant wonder and marvel in her beauty, that had shone but the more lovely in the candlelight at dinner. But there were further delights to me in the days that came, for I had happiness in the way that she had pleasure of the mystery of the evening, and the glamour of night, and the joy of dawn, and all such like. And one evening, that I ever remember, as we wandered in the parklands, she began to say, half unthinking, that it was truly an elves' night. And she stopped herself immediately, as though she thought I should have no understanding. But indeed, I was upon mine own familiar ground of inward delight, and I replied in a quiet and usual voice that the towers of sleep would grow that night, and I felt in my bones that it was a night to find the giant's tomb, or the tree with the great painted head, and surely I stopped very sudden, for she gripped me in that moment, and her hand shook as she held me. But when I would ask her what ailed, she bid me very breathless to say on, and with a half understanding, I told her that I had but meant to speak of the moon garden. That was an olden and happy fancy of mine, and in verity when I said that, the Lady Murdath cried out something in a strange, low voice, and brought me to a halt, that she might face me, and she questioned me very earnest. And I answered just so earnest as she, for I was grown suddenly to an excitement in that I perceived she knew also, and in verity she told me that she had knowledge, but had thought that she was alone in the world with her knowledge of that strange land of her dreams, and now to find that I also had travelled in those dear, strange dreamlands. And truly the marvel of it, as she to say time and oft, and again, as we walked, she gave out word that there was little wonder she had been urged to call to me that night, as she saw me pause upon the road. Though indeed she had learned of our cousinship before, having seen me go by on my horse pretty oft, and inquired concerning me, and mayhap daintily irked that I had so little heed of Lady Meredith the Beautiful. But indeed I had thought of other matters, yet had been human enough, had I but met her proper before I see her. Now you must not think that I was not utter stirred by the wonder of this thing, that we had both a dreamful knowledge of the same matters, of which each had thought none other knew. Yet when I questioned more, there was much that had been in my fancies that was foreign to her, and likewise much that had been familiar to her that was of no meaning to me. But though there was this, that brought a little regret to us, there would be, time and again, some new thing that one told, that the other knew and could finish the telling of, to the gladness and amazement of both. And so shall you picture us wandering and having constant speech, so that hour by hour we grew gladly aged in dear knowledge and sweet friendship of the other. And truly, how the time passed I know not, but there came presently a hullabaloo, and the shouts of men's voices, and the baying of dogs, and the gleam of lanthorns, so that I knew not what to think. Until very sudden, and with a sweet and strange little laughter, the Lady Meredith, to perceive that we had missed the hours utter in our converse, so that her guardian, made uneasy because of the 3 footpads, had ordered a search. And we all that time a wander together in happy forgetfulness, and we turned homeward then, and came towards the lights. But indeed, the dogs found us before we were come there, and they had grown to know me now, and leapt about me, barking very friendly. And so in a minute the men had discovered us, and were gone back to tell Sir Giles that all was well, and this was the way of our meeting, and the growing of our acquaintance, and the beginning of my great love for Meredith the Beautiful. Now, from that time onward, evening by evening would I go a wander along the quiet and country road that led from my estate to the estate of Sir Giles. And always I went inward by the hedge gap, and oft I should find the Lady Meredith walking in that part of the woods, but always with her great boarhounds about her. For I had begged that she do this thing for her sweet safety, and she to seem wishful to pleasure me, but truly to be just so oft utter perverse in diverse matters, and to strive to plague me, as though she would discover how much I would endure, and how far she might go to anger me. And truly, well, I remember how that one night, coming to the hedge gap, I saw 2 country maids come thence out from the woods of Sir Giles. But they were naught to me, and I would have gone upward through the gap as ever. Only that as they passed me, they curtsied somewhat over-graceful for rough wenches. And I had a sudden thought, and came up to them to see them more anigh. And truly I thought the taller was surely the Lady Meredith. But indeed I could not be sure, for when I asked who she did be, she only to simper and to curtsy again. And so was I very natural all in doubt, but yet sufficient in wonder, having some knowledge of the Lady Meredith, to follow the wenches, the which I did, and they then very speedy and sedate, as though I were some rack-rape that they did well to be feared of alone at night. And so came at last to the village green, where a great dance was afoot with torches, and a wandering fiddler to set the tune, and ale in plenty, the 2 to join the dance, and danced very hearty, but had only each the other for a partner, and had a good care to avoid the torches. And by this I was pretty sure that they were truly the Lady Meredith and her maid. And so I took chance when they had danced somewhat my way, to step over to them, and ask boldly for a dance. But indeed the tall one answered, simpering that she was promised, and immediately gave her hand to a great hulking farmer lout, and went round the green with him. And well punished she was for her waywardness, for she had all her skill to save her pretty feet from his loutish stampings. And very glad she was to meet the end of the dance, and I knew now for certainty that it was Meredith the Beautiful, despite her plan of disguise, and the darkness, and the wench's dress, and the footgear that marred her step so great. And I walked across to her and named her, whispering by name, and gave her plain word to be done of this unwisdom, and I would take her home. But she to turn from me, and she stamped her foot and went again to the lout. And when she had suffered another dance with him, she bid him be her escort a part of the way, the which he was nothing loath of. And another lad that was mate to him went likewise. And in a moment, so soon as they were gone away from the light of the torches, the rough hind lads made to set their arms about the waists of the two wenches, not wetting who they had for companions. And the Lady Murdath was no longer able to endure, and cried out in her sudden fear and disgust, and struck the rough hind that embraced her so hard that he loosed her a moment, swearing great oaths. And directly he came back to her again, and had her in a moment to kiss her. And she, loathing him to the very death, beat him madly in the face with her hands. But to no end, only that I was close upon them. And in that moment she screamed my name aloud. And I caught the poor lout and hit him once, but not to harm him overmuch, yet to give him a long memory of me. And afterward I threw him into the side of the road. But the second hind, having heard my name, loosed from the tiring maid and ran for his life. And indeed, my strength was known all about that part, and I caught Murdath the Beautiful by her shoulders, and shook her very soundly in my anger. And afterward I sent the maid onward, and she, having no word from her mistress to stay, went forward a little. And in this fashion we came at last to the hedge gap, with the Lady Murdath very hushed, but yet walking anigh to me, as that she had some secret pleasure of my nearness. And I led her through the gap, and so homeward to the hall, and there bid her good night at a side door that she held the key of. And truly she bid me good night in an utter quiet voice, and was almost as that she had no haste to be gone from me that night. Yet when I met her on the morrow, she was full of a constant impudence to me, so that having her alone to myself, when the dusk was come, I asked her why she would never be done of her waywardness, because that I ached to have companionship of her, and instead she denied my need. And at that she was at once very gentle, and full of a sweet and winsome understanding, and surely knew that I wished to be rested, for she brought out her harp, and played me dear olden melodies of our childhood days all that evening. And so had my love for her the more intent and glad, and she saw me that night to the hedge gap, having her 3 great boarhounds with her, to company her home again. But indeed I followed her afterwards, very silent, until I saw her safe into the hall, for I would not have her alone in the night, though she believed that I was then far away on the country road. And as she walked with her dogs, one or another would run back to me, to nose against me friendly wise, but I sent them off again very quiet, and she had no knowledge of aught. For she to go singing a love song quietly all the way home, but whether she loved me I could not tell, though she had a nice affection for me. Now on the following evening I went somewhat early to the gap, and lo, who should be standing in the gap talking to the Lady Murdath, but a very clever dressed man that had a look of the court about him. And he, when I approached, made no way for me through the gap, but stood firm, and eyed me very insolent, so that I put out my hand and lifted him from my way. And lo, the Lady Murdath turned a bitterness of speech upon me that gave me an utter pain and astonishment, so that I was assured in a moment that she had no true love for me, or she had never striven so to put me to shame before the stranger, and named me uncouth and brutal to a smaller man. And indeed you shall perceive how I was in my heart in that moment. I saw that there was some seeming of justice in what the Lady Murdath said, but yet might the man have shown a better spirit. And moreover, Murdath the Beautiful had no true call to shame me, her true friend and cousin, before this stranger. Yet did I not stop to argue, but bowed very low to the Lady Murdath, and afterward I bowed a little to the man and made apology, for indeed he was neither great nor strong made, and I had been better man to have shown courtesy to him, at least in the first. And so, having done justice to my own respect, I turned and went on, and left them to their happiness. Now, I walked then, maybe 20 good miles, before I came to my own home. For there was no rest in me all that night or ever, because that I was grown deadly in love of Murdath the beautiful, and all my spirit and heart and body of me pained with the dreadful loss that I was come so sudden upon. And for a great week I had my walks in another direction. But in the end of that week I must take my walk along the olden way, that I might chance to have but a sight of my lady. And truly I had all sight that ever man did need to put him in dread pain and jealousy. For truly, as I came in view of the gap, there was the Lady Murdath walking just without the borders of the great wood, and beside her there walked the clever-dressed man of the court, and she suffered his arm around her, so that I knew they were lovers. For the Lady Murdath had no brothers, nor any youthful men kin. Yet when Murdath saw me upon the road, she shamed in a moment to be so caught. For she put her lover's arm from about her, and bowed to me, a little changed of colour in the face. And I bowed very low, being but a young man myself, and so passed on, with my heart very dead in me. And as I went, I saw that her lover came again to her, and had his arm once more about her. And so maybe they looked after me as I went very stiff and desperate. But indeed I looked not back on them, as you may think, and for a great month then I went not near to the gap. For my love raged in me, and I was hurt in my pride. And truly, neither had a true justice been dealt to me by the Lady Murdath. Yet in that month my love was a leaven in me, and made slowly a sweetness and a tenderness and an understanding that were not in me before. And truly love and pain do shape the character of man. And in the end of that time, I saw a little way into life with an understanding heart, and began presently to take my walks again past the gap. But truly Murdath the beautiful was never to my sight, though one evening I thought she might be not a great way off. For one of her great boarhounds came out of the wood, and down into the road to nose against me, very friendly as a dog oft doth with me. Yet, though I waited a good time after the dog had left me, I had no sight of Murdath. And so passed on again, with my heart heavy in me, but without bitterness, because of the understanding that was begun to grow in my heart. Now there passed 2 weary and lonely weeks, in which I grew sick to have knowledge of the beautiful maid. And truly, in the end of that time, I made a sudden resolving that I would go in through the gap, and come to the home grounds about the hall, and so maybe have some sight of her. And this resolving I had one evening. And I went out immediately, and came to the gap, and went in through the gap, and so by a long walking to the gardens about the hall. And truly when I was come there, I saw a good light of lanthorns and torches, and a great company of people dancing, and all dressed in quaint dress, so that I knew they had a festival for some cause. And there came suddenly a horrid dread into my heart that this might be the marriage dance of the Lady Murdath. But indeed this was foolishness, for I had surely heard of the marriage, if there had been any. And truly, in a moment, I remembered that she was come 21 years of age on that day, and to the end of her wardship, and this surely to be festival in honour of the same. And a very bright and pretty matter it was to watch, save that I was so heavy in the heart with loneliness and longing. For the company was great and gay, and the lights plentiful and set all about from the trees, and in leaf-made arbours about the great lawn, and a great table spread with eating matters, and silver and crystal, and great lamps of bronze and silver went all adown one end of the lawn, and the dance constant upon the other part. Surely the Lady Murdath to step out of the dance very lovely dressed, yet seeming to mine eyes a little pale in the looming of the lights, and she to wander to a seat to rest, and indeed in a moment there to be a dozen youths of the great families of the countryside in attendance about her, making talk and laughter, and each eager for her favour. And she very lovely in the midst of them, but yet, as I did think, lacking of somewhat, and a little pale seeming, as I have told, and her glance to go oddwise beyond the group men about her, so that I understood in a moment that her lover was not there, and she to be alack in the heart for him. Yet why he was not there I could not suppose, save that he might have been called back to the court. And surely, as I watched the other young men about her, I burned with a fierce and miserable jealousy of them, so that I could near have stepped forth and plucked her out from among them, and had her to walk with me in the woods, as in the olden days, when she also had seemed near to love. But truly what use to this? For it was not they who held her heart as I saw plain. For I watched her with an eager and lonesome heart, and knew that it was one small man of the court that was lover to her, as I have told. And I went away again then, and came not near to the gap for 3 great months, because that I could not bear the pain of my loss. But in the end of that time, my very pain to urge me to go, and to be worse than the pain of not going, so that I found myself one evening in the gap, peering, very eager and shaken, across the sward that lay between the gap and the woods, for this same place to be as an holy ground to me. For there was it that first I saw Meredith the beautiful, and surely lost my heart to her in that one night, and a great time I stayed there in the gap, waiting and watching hopelessly. And lo, sudden there came something against me, touching my thigh very soft, and when I looked down, it was one of the boarhounds, so that my heart leaped near frightened. For truly my lady was come somewhere nigh, as I did think, and as I waited, very hushed and watchful, yet with an utter beating heart. Surely I heard a faint and low singing among the trees, so utter sad, and lo, it was Meredith singing a broken love song, and a wander there in the dark alone, save for her great dogs. And I harked with strange pain in me, that she did be so in pain, and I ached to bring her ease, yet moved not, but was very still there in the gap, save that my being was all in turmoil. And presently, as I harked, there came a slim white figure out from among the trees, and the figure cried out something, and came to a quick pause, as I could see in the half-dark. And lo, in that moment, there came a sudden and unreasoned hope into me, and I came up out of the gap, and was come to Meredith in a moment, calling very low and passionate and eager, Meredith, Meredith, Meredith! And this way I came to her, and her great dog that was with me, to bound beside me, and thought, mayhap, that it was some game. And when I came to the Lady Meredith, I held out my hands to her, not knowing what I did, but only the telling of my heart that needed her so utter, and craved to ease her of her pain. And lo, she put out her arms to me, and came into mine arms with a little run, and there she bode, weeping strangely, but yet with rest upon her, even as rest was come sudden and wondrous upon me, and sudden she moved in mine arms, and slipped her hands to me very dear, and held her lips up to me like some sweet child, that I kiss her. But indeed, she was also a true woman, and in honest and dear love of me, and this to be the way of our betrothal, and simple and wordless it was, yet sufficient only that there is no sufficiency in love. Now presently she loosed herself out of mine arms, and we walked homeward through the woods, very quiet and holding hands as children do. And I then in a while to ask her about the man of the court, and she laughed very sweet into the silence of the wood, but gave me no answer, save that I wait until we were come to the hall. And when we were come there, she took me into the great hall, and made a very dainty and impudent bow, mocking me, and so made me known to another lady, who sat there upon her task of embroidering, which she did very demure, and as that she had also a dainty mischief lurking in her, truly the Lady Meredith never to be done of naughty laughter, that made her dearly breathless with delight, and to sway a little, and set the trembling of pretty sounds in her throat. And surely she must pull down 2 great pistols from an arm-rack, that I fight a duel to the death with the lady of the embroidering, who held her face down over her work, and shook likewise with the wickedness of her laughter that she could not hide. And in the end, the lady of the embroidering looked up sudden into my face, and I then to see somewhat of the mischief in a moment, for she had the face of the man of the court suit, that had been lover to Meredith, and the Lady Meredith then to explain to me how that Mistress Alison, which was her name, was a dear and bosom friend, and she it was that had been dressed in the court suit, to play a prank for a wager with a certain young man who would be lover to her, and he might, and I then to come along, and so speedy to offence that truly I never saw her face plain, because that I was so utter jealous. And so the Lady Murdath had been more justly in anger than I supposed, because that I had put hands upon her friend, as I have told, and this to be all of it, save that they had planned to punish me, and had met every evening at the gap to play at lovers, perchance I should pass, so that I should have greater cause for my jealousy, and truly they to have a good revenge upon me. For I had suffered very great a long while because of it, yet as you do mind, when I came upon them, the Lady Murdath had a half regret. That was very natural, because even then she was in love of me, as I of her. And because of this, she drew away, as you shall remember, being, as she confessed, suddenly and strangely troubled, and to want me. But afterwards as much set again to my punishment, because that I bowed so cold, and went away. And indeed, well I might, yet truly all was safe-ended now, and I utter thankful and with a mad delight in the heart, so that I caught up Murdath, and we danced very slow and stately around the great hall, the while that Mistress Alison whistled us a tune with her mouth, which she could very clever as many another thing. I wait, and each day and all day after this gladness, Murdath and I could never be apart, but must go a wander always together here and there in an unending joy of our togetherness. And I began again to tell her of my love, that should pass beyond death. And lo, in that one moment of time the light went out of her eyes, and my beautiful one lay dead in mine arms. My beautiful one. Chapter 2. The last redoubt since Murdath. My beautiful one died and left me lonely in this world. I have suffered an anguish and an utter and dreadful pain of longing, such as truly no words shall ever tell. For in truth, I that had all the world through her sweet love and companionship, and knew all the joy and gladness of life, have known such lonesome misery as doth stun me to think upon. Yet am I to my pen again. For of late a wondrous hope has grown in me, in that I have, at night in my sleep, waked into the future of this world, and seen strange things and utter marvels, and known once more the gladness of life. For I have learned the promise of the future, and have visited in my dreams those places where in the womb of time she and I shall come together and part, and again come together, breaking asunder most drearily in pain, and again reuniting after strange ages, in a glad and mighty wonder. And this is the utter strange story of that which I have seen, and which truly I must set out, if the task be not too great, so that, in the setting out thereof, I may gain a little ease of the heart, and likewise mayhap give ease of hope to some other poor human that doth suffer, even as I have suffered so dreadful with longing for mine own that is dead. And some shall read and say that this thing was not, and some shall dispute with them. But to them all I say naught save read, and having read that which I set down, then shall one and all have looked towards eternity with me unto its very portals. And so to my telling, to me, in this last time of my visions, of which I would tell, it was not as if I dreamed, but as it were, that I waked there into the dark in the future of this world, and the sun had died. And for me, thus newly waked into that future, to look back upon this, our present age, was to look back into dreams that my soul knew to be of reality, but which to those newly seeing eyes of mine appeared but as a far vision, strangely hallowed with peacefulness and light. Always, it seemed to me when I awaked into the future, into the everlasting night that lapped this world, that I saw near to me, and girdling me all about a blurred greyness. And presently this, the greyness, would clear and fade from about me, even as a dusky cloud, and I would look out upon a world of darkness, lit here and there with strange sights. And with my waking into that future, I waked not to ignorance, but to a full knowledge of those things which lit the nightland, even as a man wakes from sleep each morning, and knows immediately he wakes the names and knowledge of the time which has bred him and in which he lives. And the same while a knowledge I had, as it were subconscious of this present, this early life, which now I live so utterly alone. In my earliest knowledge of that place, I was a youth, 17 years grown, and my memory tells me that when first I waked, or came as it might be said to myself in that future, I stood in one of the embrasures of the last redoubt, that great pyramid of grey metal which held the last millions of this world from the powers of the slayers. And so full am I of the knowledge of that place, that scarce can I believe that none here know. And because I have such difficulty, it may be that I speak over familiarly of those things of which I know, and heed not to explain much that it is needful that I should explain to those who must read here in this our present day. For there, as I stood and looked out, I was less the man of years of this age than the youth of that, with the natural knowledge of that life which I had gathered by living all my 17 years of life there. Though until that my first vision, I, of this age, knew not of that other and future existence, yet woke to it so naturally as may a man wake here in his bed to the shining of the morning sun, and know it by name and the meaning of aught else. And yet, as I stood there in the vast embrasure, I had also a knowledge or memory of this present life of ours, deep down within me, but touched with a halo of dreams, and yet with a conscious longing for one, known even there in a half-memory as Murdath. As I have said, in my earliest memory, I mind that I stood in an embrasure, high up in the side of the pyramid, and looked outwards through a queer spyglass to the northwest. I full of youth, and with an adventurous and yet half-fearful heart. And in my brain was, as I have told, the knowledge that had come to me in all the years of my life in the redoubt. And yet until that moment, this man of this present time had no knowledge of that future existence. And now I stood, and had suddenly the knowledge of a life already spent in that strange land, and deeper within me the misty knowings of this our present age, and maybe also of some others. To the northwest I looked through the queer spyglass, and saw a landscape that I had looked upon and pored upon through all the years of that life, so that I knew how to name this thing and that thing, and give the very distances of each and every one from the center point of the pyramid, which was that which had neither length nor breadth, and was made of polished metal in the room of mathematics, where I went daily to my studies. To the northwest I looked, and in the wide field of my glass saw plain the bright glare of the fire from the red pit, shine upwards against the underside of the vast chin of the northwest watcher, the watching thing of the northwest, that which hath watched from the beginning, and until the opening of the gateway of eternity came into my thoughts as I looked through the glass. The words of Aesop, the ancient poet, though incredibly future to this our time, and suddenly they seemed at fault, for I looked deep down into my being, and saw, as dreams are seen, the sunlight and splendor of this our present age, and I was amazed. And here I must make it clear to all that, even as I waked from this age suddenly into that life, so must I, that youth there in the embrasure, have awakened then to the knowledge of this far back life of ours, seeming to him a vision of the very beginnings of eternity, in the dawn of the world. Oh, I do but dread I make it not sufficient clear that I and he were both I, the same soul. He of that far date seeing vaguely the life that was, that I do now live in this present age. And I of this time beholding the life that I yet shall live. How utterly strange! And yet I do not know that I speak holy truth to say that I in that future time had no knowledge of this life and age before that awakening. For I woke to find that I was one who stood apart from the other youths, in that I had a dim knowledge, visionary, as it were, of the past, which confounded whilst yet it angered those who were the men of learning of that age. Though of this matter more anon, but this I do know, that from that time onwards my knowledge and assuredness of the past was tenfold. For this my memory of that life told me, and so to further my telling. Yet before I pass onwards, one other thing is there of which I shall speak, in the moment in which I waked out of that youthfulness, into the assured awareness of this our age. In that moment, the hunger of this, my love, flew to me across the ages, so that what had been but a memory dream grew to the pain of reality, and I knew suddenly that I lacked. And from that time onwards I went, listening, as even now my life is spent, And so it was that I, fresh-born in that future time, hungered strangely for my beautiful one, with all the strength of that new life, knowing that she had been mine and might live again, even as I. And so, as I have said, I hungered and found that I listened. And now, to go back from my digression, it was as I have said. I had amazement at perceiving in memory the unknowable sunshine and splendor of this age, breaking so clear through my hitherto most vague and hazy visions, so that the ignorance of Aesworth was shouted to me by the things which now I knew. And from that time onward, for a little space, I was stunned with all that I knew and guessed and felt. And all of a long while the hunger grew for that one I had lost in the early days, she who had sung to me in those fairy days of light that had been in verity. And the especial thoughts of that age looked back with a keen, regretful wonder into the gulf of forgetfulness. But presently I turned from the haze and pain of my dream memories, once more to the inconceivable mystery of the nightland, which I viewed through the great embrasure. For on none did it ever come with weariness to look out upon all the hideous mysteries, so that old and young watched from early years to death the black monstrosity of the nightland, which this our last refuge of humanity held at bay. To the right of the red pit there lay a long, sinuous glare which I knew as the veil of red fire, and beyond that for many dreary miles the blackness of the nightland, across which came the coldness of the light from the plain of blue fire. And then, on the very borders of the unknown lands, there lay a range of low volcanoes, which lit up far away in the outer darkness the black hills where shone the seven lights, which neither twinkled nor moved nor faltered through eternity, and of which even the great spyglass could make no understanding, nor had any adventurer from the pyramid ever come back to tell us aught of them. And here let me say that down in the great library of the redoubt were the histories of all those, with their discoveries, who had ventured out into the monstrousness of the nightland, risking not the life only but the spirit of life. And surely it is all so strange and wonderful to set out that I could almost despair with the contemplation of that which I must achieve. For there is so much to tell, and so few words given to man, by which he may make clear that which lies beyond the sight and the present and general knowings of peoples. How shall you ever know, as I know in verity, of the greatness and reality and terror of the thing that I would tell plain to all? For we, with our puny span of recorded life, must have great histories to tell, but the few bare details we know concerning years that are but a few thousands in all. And I must set out to you in the short pages of this, my life there, a sufficiency of the life that had been and the life that was, both within and without that mighty pyramid, to make clear to those who may read the truth of that which I would tell. And the histories of that great redoubt dealt not with odd thousands of years, but with very millions, aye, away back into what they of that age conceived to be the early days of the earth, when the sun, maybe, still gloomed dully in the night sky of the world. But of all that went before, nothing save as myths and matters to be taken most cautiously, and believed not by men of sanity and proved wisdom. And how shall I make all this clear to you who may read? The thing cannot be, and yet I must tell my history. For to be silent before so much wonder would be to suffer of too full a heart. And I must even ease my spirit by this my struggle to tell to all how it was with me, and how it will be. Aye, even to the memories which were the possession of that far future youth, who was indeed I of his childhood's days, when his nurse of that age swung him and crooned impossible lullabies of this mythical sun which, according to those future fairy tales, had once passed across the blackness that now lay above the pyramid. Such is the monstrous futureness of this which I have seen through the body of that far-off youth. And so back to my telling. To my right, which was to the north, there stood very far away the house of silence upon a low hill. And in that house were many lights and no sound. And so had it been through an uncountable eternity of years. Always those steady lights and no whisper of sound, not even such as our distance microphones could have discovered. And the danger of this house was accounted the greatest danger of all those lands. And round by the house of silence wound the road where the silent ones walk. And concerning this road, which passed out of the unknown lands, nigh by the place of the abhumans, where was always the green, luminous mist, nothing was known, save that it was held that, of all the works about the mighty pyramid, it was alone the one that was bred, long ages past, of healthy human toil and labor. And on this point alone had 1,000 books and more been writ, and all contrary, and so to no end, as is ever the way in such matters. And as it was with the road where the silent ones walk, so it was with all those other monstrous things. Whole libraries had there been made upon this and upon that, and many 1,000 million mouldered into the forgotten dust of the earlier world. I mind me now that presently I stepped upon the central travelling roadway, which spanned the 1,000th plateau of the great redoubt, and this lay 6 miles and 30 fathoms above the plain of the nightland, and was somewhat of a great mile or more across. And so in a few minutes I was at the southeastern wall, and looking out through the great embrasure towards the 3 silver fire holes that shone before the thing that nods away down far in the southeast. Southward of this, but nearer, there rose the vast bulk of the southeast watcher, the watching thing of the southeast. And to the right and to the left of the squat monster burned the torches, maybe half a mile upon each side, yet sufficient light they threw to show the lumbered forward head of the never-sleeping brute. To the east, as I stood there in the quietness of the sleeping time on the 1,000th plateau, I heard a far dreadful sound down in the lightless east, and presently again a strange dreadful laughter, deep as a low thunder among the mountains. And because this sound came odd, whiles from the unknown lands beyond the Valley of the Hounds, we had named that far and never-seen place the country whence comes the great laughter. And though I had heard the sound many and oft a time, yet did I never hear it without a most strange thrilling of my heart, and a sense of my littleness, and of the utter terror which had beset the last millions of the world. Yet, because I had heard the laughter oft, I paid not overlong attention to my thoughts upon it. And when, in a little, it died away into that eastern darkness, I turned my spyglass upon the giant's pit, which lay to the south of the giant's kilns. And these same kilns were tended by the giants, and the light of the kilns was red and fitful, and threw wavering shadows and lights across the mouth of the pit, so that I saw giants crawling up out of the pit, but not properly seen by reason of the dance of the shadows. And so, because ever there was so much to behold, I looked away presently to that which was plainer to be examined. To the back of the giant's pit was a great black headland that stood vast between the Valley of the Hounds, where lived the monstrous night hounds, and the giants. And the light of the kilns struck the brow of this black headland, so that constantly I saw things peer over the edge, coming forward a little into the light of the kilns, and drawing back swiftly into the shadows. And thus it had been ever through the uncounted ages, so that the headland was known as the headland from which strange things peer. And thus was it marked in our maps and charts of that grim world, and so I could go on ever. But that I fear to weary, and yet whether I do weary or not, I must tell of this country that I see, even now, as I set my thoughts down, so plainly that my memory wanders in a hushed and secret fashion along its starkness, and amid its strange and dread habitants, so that it is but by an effort I realize me, that my body is not there in this very moment that I write. And so to further tellings, before me ran the road where the silent ones walk, and I searched it, as many a time in my earlier youth had I with the spyglass. For my heart was always stirred mightily by the sight of those silent ones, and presently alone in all the miles of that night-grey road, I saw one in the field of my glass, a quiet, cloaked figure moving along, shrouded, and looking neither to right nor left. And thus was it with these beings ever. It was told about in the redoubt that they would harm no human, if but the human did keep a fair distance from them, but that it were wise never to come close upon one, And this I can well believe, and so, searching the road with my gaze, I passed beyond this silent one, and past the place where the road, sweeping vastly to the southeast, was lit a space strangely by the light from the silver fire holes, and thus at last to where it swayed to the south of the dark palace, and thence southward still, until it passed round to the westward, beyond the mountain bulk of the watching thing in the south, the hugest monster in all the visible nightlands. My spyglass showed it to me with clearness, a living hill of watchfulness, known to us as the Watcher of the South. It brooded there, squat and tremendous, hunched over the pale radiance of the glowing dome. Much I know had been writ concerning this odd, vast watcher, for it had grown out of the blackness of the south unknown lands 1,000,000 years gone. And the steady growing nearness of it had been noted and set out at length by the men they called monstruations, so that it was possible to search in our libraries and learn of the very coming of this beast in the olden time. And, while I mind me, there were even then and always men named monstruations, whose duty it was to take heed of the great forces, and to watch the monsters and the beasts that beset the Great Pyramid, and measure and record, and have so full a knowledge of these same that, did one but sway and head in the darkness, the same matter was set down with particularness in the records, and so to tell more about the South Watcher. 1,000,000 years gone, as I have told, came it out from the blackness of the south, and grew steadily nearer through 20,000 years. But so slow that in no one year could a man perceive that it had moved, yet it had movement, and had come thus far upon its road to the redoubt, when the glowing dome rose out of the ground before it, growing slowly. And this had stayed the way of the monster, so that through an eternity it had looked towards the pyramid across the pale glare of the dome, and seeming to have no power to advance nearer. And because of this, much had been writ to prove that there were other forces than evil at work in the nightlands about the last redoubt. And this I have always thought to be wisely said, and indeed there to be no doubt to the matter, for there were many things in the time of which I have knowledge, which seemed to make clear that, even as the forces of darkness were loose upon the end of man, so were there other forces out to do battle with the terror, though in ways most strange and unthought of by the human mind. And of this I shall have more to tell anon. And here, before I go further with my telling, let me set out some of that knowledge which yet remains so clear within my mind and heart. Of the coming of these monstrosities and evil forces, no man could say much with verity, for the evil of it began before the histories of the great redoubt were shaped, aye, even before the sun had lost all power to light, though it must not be a thing of certainty that even at this far time the invisible black heavens held no warmth for this world. But of this I have no room to tell, and must pass on to that of which I have a more certain knowledge. The evil must surely have begun in the days of the darkening, which I might liken to a story which was believed doubtfully, much as we of this day believe the story of the creation. A dim record there was of olden sciences that are yet far off in our future, which, disturbing the unmeasurable outward powers, had allowed to pass the barrier of life some of those monsters and abhuman creatures, which are so wondrously cushioned from us at this normal present. And thus there had materialized and in other cases developed grotesque and horrible creatures, which now beset the humans of this world. And where there was no power to take on material form, there had been allowed to certain dreadful forces to have power to affect the life of the human spirit. And this growing very dreadful, and the world full of lawlessness and degeneracy, there had banded together the sound millions and built the last redoubt. There in the twilight of the world, so it seems to us, and yet to them, bred at last to the peace of usage, as it were the beginning. And this I can make no clearer, and none hath right to expect it. For my task is very great, and beyond the power of human skill. And when the humans had built the Great Pyramid, it had 1,320 floors, and the thickness of each floor was according to the strength of its need. And the whole height of this pyramid exceeded 7 miles by near a mile, and above it was a tower from which the watchmen looked, these being called the monstruations. But where the redoubt was built I know not, save that I believe in a mighty valley, of which I may tell more in due time. And when the pyramid was built, the last millions, who were the builders thereof, went within, and made themselves a great house and city of this last redoubt. And thus began the second history of this world. And how shall I set it all down in these little pages? For my task, even as I see it, is too great for the power of a single life and a single pen. Yet to it, and later through hundreds and thousands of years, there grew up in the outer lands, beyond those which lay under the guard of the redoubt, mighty and lost races of terrible creatures, half man and half beast, and evil and dreadful. And these made war upon the redoubt, but were beaten off from that grim metal mountain with a vast slaughter. Yet must there have been many such attacks until the electric circle was put about the pyramid and lit from the earth current. And the lowest half-mile of the pyramid was sealed. And so at last there was a peace, and the beginnings of that eternity of quiet, watching for the day when the earth current shall become exhausted. And, at whiles, through the forgotten centuries, had the creatures been glutted time and again upon such odd bands of daring ones as had adventured forth to explore through the mystery of the nightlands. For of those who went, scarce any did ever return. For there were eyes in all that dark, and powers and forces abroad, which had all knowledge, or so we must fain believe. And then, so it would seem, as that eternal night lengthened itself upon the world, the power of terror grew and strengthened, and fresh and greater monsters developed and bred out of all space and outward dimensions, attracted even as it might be infernal sharks, by that lonely and mighty hill of humanity facing its end, so near to the eternal, and yet so far deferred in the minds and to the senses of those humans. And thus hath it been ever, and all this but by the way, and vague and ill-told, and set out in despair to make a little clear the beginnings of that state, which is so strange to our conceptions, and yet which had become a condition of naturalness to humanity in that stupendous future. Thus had the giants come, fathered of bestial humans and mothered of monsters, and many and diverse were the creatures which had some human semblance, and intelligence, mechanical and cunning, so that certain of these lesser brutes had machinery and underground ways, having need to secure to themselves warmth and air, even as healthy humans, only that they were incredibly inured to hardship, as they might be wolves set in comparison with tender children. And surely do I make this thing clear? And now to continue my telling concerning the Nightland. The Watcher of the South was, as I have set to make known, a monster differing from those other watching things, of which I have spoken, and of which there were in all 4, one to the northwest and one to the southeast, and of these I have told. And the other twain lay brooding, one to the southwest and the other to the northeast. And thus the 4 watchers kept ward through the darkness upon the pyramid, and moved not, neither gave they out any sound. Yet did we know them to be mountains of living watchfulness and hideous and steadfast intelligence. And so, in a while, having listened to the sorrowful sound which came ever to us over the grey dunes, from the country of wailing, which lay to the south, midway between the redoubt and the Watcher of the South, I passed upon one of the moving roadways over to the southwestern side of the pyramid, and looked from a narrow embrasure thence far down into the deep valley, which was 4 miles deep, and in which was the pit of the red smoke, and the mouth of this pit was 1 full mile across, and the smoke of the pit filled the valley at times, so that it seemed but as a glowing red circle amid dull thunderous clouds of redness. Yet the red smoke rose never much above the valley, so that there was clear sight across to the country beyond. And there, along the further edge of that great depth, were the towers, each maybe a mile high, grey and quiet, but with a shimmer upon them. Beyond these, south and west of them, was the enormous bulk of the southwest watcher, and from the ground rose what we named the eye-beam, a single ray of grey light, which came up out of the ground and lit the right eye of the monster. And because of this light, that eye had been mightily examined through unknown thousands of years. And some held that the eye looked through the light steadfastly at the pyramid, but others set out that the light blinded it, and was the work of those other powers which were abroad to do combat with the evil forces. But however this may be, as I stood there in the embrasure and looked at the thing through the spyglass, it seemed to my soul that the brute looked straightly at me, unwinking and steadfast, and fully of a knowledge that I spied upon it. And this is how I felt. To the north of this, in the direction of the west, I saw the place where the silent ones kill. And this was so named because there, maybe 10,000 years gone, certain humans adventuring from the pyramid came off the road where the silent ones walk, and into that place, and were immediately destroyed. And this was told by one who escaped, though he died also very quickly, for his heart was frozen. And this I cannot explain, but so it was set out in the records, far away beyond the place where the silent ones kill. In the very mouth of the western night was the place of the abhumans, where was lost the road where the silent ones walk in a dull green luminous mist. And of this place nothing was known, though much it held the thoughts and attentions of our thinkers and imaginers. For some said that there was a place of safety, differing from the redoubt, as we of this day suppose heaven to differ from the earth, and that the road led thence, but was barred by the abhumans. And this I can only set down here, but with no thought to justify or uphold it. Later, I travelled over to the northeastern wall of the redoubt, and looked thence with my spyglass at the Watcher of the Northeast, the Crowned Watcher it was called, in that within the air above its vast head there hung always a blue luminous ring, which shed a strange light downwards over the monster, showing a wrinkled brow upon which an whole library had been writ, but putting to the shadow all the lower face, all save the ear, which came out from the back of the head and belled towards the redoubt, and had been said by some observers in the past to have been seen to quiver. But how that might be I knew not, for no man of our days had seen such a thing, and beyond the watching thing was the place where the silent ones are never, close by the great road, which was bounded upon the far side by the giant sea, and upon the far side of that was a road which was always named the road by the quiet city, for it passed along that place where burned forever the constant and never-moving lights of a strange city. But no glass had ever shown life there, neither had any light ever ceased to burn, and beyond that again was the black mist. And here, let me say, that the Valley of the Hounds ended towards the lights of the quiet city, and so have I set out something of that land, and of those creatures and circumstances which beset us about, waiting until the day of doom, when our earth current should cease, and leave us helpless to the watchers and the abundant terror. And there I stood, and looked forth composedly, as may one who has been born to know of such matters, and reared in the knowledge of them. And anon I would look upward, and see the grey, metalled mountain going up measureless into the gloom of the everlasting night, and from my feet the sheer downward sweep of the grim metal walls, 6 full miles and more, to the plain below. And one thing, and I fear me many, have I missed to set out with particularness. There was, as you do know, all around the base of the pyramid, which was 5 1/4 miles every way, a great circle of light, which was set up by the earth current, and burned within a transparent tube, or had that appearance. And it bounded the pyramid for a clear mile upon every side, and burned forever, and none of the monsters had power ever to pass across, because of what we did call the air clog that it did make, as an invisible wall of safety. And it did give out also a more subtile vibration that did affect the weak brain elements of the monsters and the lower men brutes. And some did hold that there went from it a further vibration of a greater subtleness that gave a protecting against the evil forces. And some quality it had truly this wise, for the evil powers had no ability to cause harm to any within, Yet were there some dangers against which it might not avail, but these had no cunning to bring harm to any within the great redoubt, who had wisdom to meddle with no dreadfulness. And so were those last millions guarded until the earth current should be used to its end. And this circle is that which I have called the electric circle, though with failure to explain, but there it was called only the circle. And thus have I, with great effort, made a little clear that grim land of night, where presently my listening heard one calling across the dark. And how that this grew upon me I will set out forthwith. Chapter 3. The quiet calling now, oft had I heard tell, not only in that great city which occupied the 1,000th floor, but in others of the 1,320 cities of the pyramid, that there was somewhere out in the desolation of the nightlands a second place of refuge, where had gathered in another part of this dead world some last millions of the human race to fight unto the end. And this story I heard everywhere in my travels through the cities of the great redoubt, which travels began when I came upon my 17th year, and continued for 3 years and 225 days, being even then but 1 day in each city, as was the custom in the training of every child. And truly, it was a great journey, and in it I met with many whom to know was to love, but whom never could I see again, for life has not space enough, and each must to his duty to the security and well-being of the redoubt. Yet for all that I have set down, we travelled much always, but there were so many millions and so few years, and as I have said, everywhere I went, there was the same story of this other place of refuge. And in such of the libraries of those cities as I had time to search, there were great numbers of works upon the existence of this other refuge, and some, far back in the years, made assertion with confidence that such a place was in verity. And indeed, no doubt did there seem in those bygone ages. But now these very records were read only by scholars who doubted, even whilst they read, and so is it ever, but of the reality of this refuge. I had never a sound doubt from the day of my hearing concerning it from our master Monstrawaken, who with all his assistants occupied the tower of observation in the apex of the pyramid. And here let me tell that he and I had always an affinity and close friendship one for the other, though he was full grown, and I but a youth. Yet so it was. And thus, when I had come to an age of 21 years of life, he opened to me a post within the tower of observation. And this was a most wondrous good fortune to me, for in all the vast redoubt, to be appointed to the tower of observation was the most desired. For thereby, even as in these days doth astronomy, was the natural curiosity of man eased somewhat, even while thwarted. Now let me tell here also, lest it be thought that I was unduly favoured because of my friendship with the master Monstrawaken, that there was a sound justification for his choice. In that to me had been given that strange gift of hearing, which we called night hearing, though this was but a fanciful name and meant little. Yet the peculiar gift was rare, and in all the millions of the pyramid, there was none with the gift to a great degree, saving only myself, and I, because of this gift, could hear the invisible vibrations of the ether, so that without harking to the calling of our recording instruments, I could take the messages which came continually through the eternal darkness. Aye, even better than they. And now it may be the better understood how much was to be counted that I had grown to listen for a voice that had not rung in mine ears for an eternity, and yet which sang sweet and clear in my memory dreams, so that it seemed to me that Murdath the Beautiful slept within my soul, and whispered to me out of all the ages. And then, one day, at the 15th hour, when began the sleep time, I had been pondering this love of mine that lived with me still, and marveling that my memory dreams held the voice of a love that had been in so remote an age. And pondering and dreaming thus, as a young man may, I could fancy this aeon-lost one were whispering beauty into my ears in verity. So clear had my memory grown, and so much had I pondered. And lo, as I stood there harking and communing with my thoughts, I thrilled suddenly, as if I had been smitten, For out of all the everlasting night, a whisper was thrilling and thrilling upon my more subtle hearing. Through 4 long years had I listened, since that awakening in the embrasure, when but a youth of 17. And now out of the world darkness and all the eternal years of that lost life, which now I live in this present age of ours, was the whisper come. For I knew it upon that instant. And yet, because I was so taught to wisdom, I answered by no name, but sent the master word through the night, sending it with my brain elements, as I could, and as all may, much or little as may be, if they be not clods. And moreover, I knew that she who called quietly would have the power to hear without instruments, if indeed it were she. And if it were but one of the false callings of the evil forces, or more cunning monsters, or as was sometimes thought concerning these callings, the house of silence, meddling with our souls, then would they have no power to say the master word, for this had been proven through all the everlasting. And lo, as I stood trembling and striving not to be tense, which destroys the receptivity, there came thrilling round and round my spiritual essence the throb of the master word, beating steadily in the night, as doth that marvelous sound. And then, with all that was sweet in my spirit, I called with my brain elements, Murdeath, Murdeath, Murdeath. And at that instant, the master monstrawaken entered that part of the tower of observation where I stood, and seeing my face stood very quiet. For though he had not the power of night hearing, he was wise and thoughtful, and took much account of my gift. Moreover, he had but come from the receiving instrument, and thought vaguely to have caught the throb of the master word, though too faint to come proper through the instrument, so that he searched for me, in that I, who had the hearing, might listen for it, I being, as I have said, gifted in that wise. And to him I told something of my story and my thoughts and my memories, and of that awakening, and thus up to this present happening. And he hearkened with sympathy and a troubled and wondering heart. For in that age a man might talk sanely upon that which, in this age of ours, would be accounted foolishness and maybe the breathings of insanity. For there, by the refinement of arts of mentality and the results of strange experiments and the accomplishment of learning, men were able to conceive of matters now closed to our conceptions, even as we of this day may haply give a calm ear to talk, that in the days of our fathers would have been surely set to the count of lunacy. And this is very clear, and all the while that I told my story, I listened with my spirit. But save for a sense of faint, happy laughter that wrapped about me, I heard naught, and nothing more all that day. Here let me put down that, because of my memories and half-memories, I would time and again dispute with our learned men, they being in doubt as to the verity of that olden story of the days of light and the existence of the sun, though something of all this was set out as of truth in our oldest records. But I, remembering, told them many tales that seemed fairy-like to them, and entranced their hearts, even whilst I angered their brains, which refused to take seriously, and as verity that which their hearts accepted gladly, even as we receive the wonder of poetry into our souls. But the master monstrawaken would listen to aught I had to tell, aye, though I spoke through hours. And so it would be odd times that, having talked long, drawing my stories from my memory dreams, I would come back again into the present of that future. And lo, all the monstrawakens would have left their instruments and observations and recording, and be gathered about me, and the master so sunken in interest that he not to have discovered them, neither had I noticed, being so full of the things which had been. But when the master came back to knowledge of that present, he would rouse and chide, and they, all those lesser ones, would fly swiftly and guiltily to their various works. And yet, so I have thought since, each with a muddled and bewildered and thoughtful air upon him, and hungry they were for more, and ever wondering and setting questions about. And so it was also with those others, those learned ones who were not of the tower of observation, and who disbelieved even whilst they hungered. Listen would they, though I talked from the first hour, which was the dawn, to the 15th hour, which was the beginning of the night. For the sleep time was set thus, after other usage and experiment. And odd whiles, I found that there were among them men of extraordinary learning who upheld my tellings as tales of verity, and so there was a faction. But later there grew more to believe, and whether they believed or not, all were ready to listen, so that I might have spended my days in talk, only that I had my work to do. But the Master Monstrawaken believed from the beginning, and was wise always to understand, so that I loved him for this, as for many another dear quality. And so, as may be conceived, among all those millions I was singled out to be known, for the stories that I told went downward through 1,000 cities. And presently, in the lowest tier of the underground fields, 100 miles deep in the earth below the redoubt, I found that the very ploughboys knew something concerning my tellings, and gathered about me one time and another when the Master Monstrawaken and I had gone down, regarding some matter that dealt with the earth current and our instruments, and of the underground fields, though in that age we called them no more than the fields, I should set down a little, for they were the mightiest work of this world, so that even the last redoubt was but a small thing beside them. 100 miles deep lay the lowest of the underground fields, and was 100 miles from side to side every way, and above it there were 306 fields, each one less in area than that beneath. And in this wise they tapered until the topmost field, which lay direct beneath the lowermost floor of the great redoubt, was but 4 miles every way. And thus it will be seen that these fields, lying one beneath the other, formed a mighty and incredible pyramid of country lands in the deep earth, 100 miles from the base unto the topmost field. And the whole was sheathed in at the sides with the grey metal of which the redoubt was builded. And each field was pillared and floored beneath the soil with this same compound of wonder. And so was it secure, and the monsters could not dig into that mighty garden from without. And all of that underground land was lit, where needed by the earth current, and that same life stream fructified the soil, and gave life and blood to the plants and to the trees, and to every bush and natural thing. And the making of those fields had taken maybe 1,000,000 years, and the dump thereof had been cast into the crack, whence came the earth current, and which had bottom beyond all soundings. And this underground country had its own winds and air currents, so that to my memory it was in no ways connected to the monstrous air shafts of the pyramid. But in this I may be mistaken, for it has not been given to me to know all that is to be known concerning that vast redoubt, nor by any one man could so much knowledge be achieved. Yet that there were wise and justly promoted winds in that underground country I do know, for healthful and sweet they were, and in the cornfields there was the sweet rustle of grain and the glad silken laughter of poppies, all beneath a warm and happy light. And here did the millions walk and take excursion and go orderly or not, even as in these days. And all this have I seen, and the talk of 1,000 lovers in the gardens of that place comes back to me, and with it all the memory of my dear one, and of a faint calling that would seem to whisper about me at times, but so faint and attenuated that even I, who had the night hearing, could not catch its import, and so went, listening ever the more intently, and oft-times calling. Now there was a law in the pyramid, tried and healthful, which held that no male should have freedom to adventure into the nightland before the age of 22, and no female ever. Yet that after such age, if a youth desired greatly to make the adventure, he should receive 3 lectures upon the dangers of which we had knowledge, and a strict account of the mutilatings and horrid deeds done to those who had so adventured. And if, after this had passed over him, he still desired, and if he were accounted healthful and sane, then should he be allowed to make the adventure. And it was accounted honor to the youth who should add to the knowledge of the pyramid. But to all such as went forth into the danger of the nightland, there was set beneath the skin of the inner side of the left forearm a small capsule, and when the wound had healed, then might the youth make the adventure. And the wherefore of this was that the spirit of the youth might be saved if he were entrapped. For then, upon the honor of his soul, must he bite forth the capsule, and immediately his spirit would have safety in death. And by this shall you know somewhat the grim and horrid danger of the dark land. And this I have set down, because later I was to make huge adventure into those lands. And even at this time, some thought of the same had come to me, for always I went listening for that quiet calling. And twice I sent the master word, throbbing solemnly through the everlasting night. Yet this I did no more without certainty, for the word must not be used lightly. But often would I say with my brain elements, Murdath, Murdath, sending the name out into the darkness. And sometimes would I seem to hear the faint thrilling of the ether around me, as though one answered, but weakly as it were with a weakened spirit, or by instrument that lacked of its earth force. And thus, for a great while there was no certainty, but only a strange anxiousness and no clear answer. Then, one day as I stood by the instruments in the tower of observation, at the 13th hour there came the thrilling of beaten ether all about me, as it were that all the void was disturbed. And I made the sign for silence, so that the men moved not in all the tower, but bowed over their breathing bells, that all disturbance might cease. And again came the gentle thrilling, and broke out into a clear, low calling in my brain. And the calling was my name, the old earth name of this day, and not the name of that age. And the name smote me with the frightenedness of fresh awakening memories. And immediately I sent the master word into the night, and all the ether was full of movement. And a silence came, and later a beat afar off in the void of night, which only I in all that great redoubt could hear, until the heavier vibrations were come. And in a moment there was all about me the throbbing of the master word, beating in the night a sure answer. Yet before this I knew that Murdath had called, but now had surety. And immediately I said Murdath, making use of the instruments, and there came a swift and beautiful answer. For out of the dark there stole an old love name that she only had ever used to me, and presently I minded me of the men, and signed to them that they should continue, for the records must not be broken. And now I had the communication full established, and by me stood the master monstrawaken, quietly as any young monstrawaken, waiting with slips to make any notes that were needful, and keeping a strict eye upon those others, but not unkindly. And so, for a space of wonder, I had speech with that girl out in the darkness of the world, who had knowledge of my name and of the old earth love name, and named herself Murdath, and much I questioned her, and presently to my sorrow, for it seemed that her name was not truly Murdath, but Nani. Neither had she known my name, but that in the library of that place where she abode, there had been a story of one named by my name, and called by that sweet love name which she had sent out somewhat ruthless into the night. And the girl's name had been Murdath, and when first she, Nani, had called, there had come back to her a cry of Murdath, Murdath, and this had minded her so strangely of that olden story which had stayed in her memory, that she had answered as the maid in that book might have answered. And thus did it seem that the utter romance of my memory love had vanished, and I stood strangely troubled for sorrow of a love of olden times. Yet even then I marveled that any book should have story so much like to mine, not heeding that the history of all love is writ with one pen. Yet even then, in that hour of my strange and quaintly foolish pain, there came a thing that set me thrilling, though more afterwards when I came to think afresh upon it. For the girl who spoke to me through the night made some wonder that my voice were not deeper, yet in quiet fashion and as one who says a thing, scarce wotting what they say. But even to me then there came a sudden hope, for in the olden days of this present age my voice had been very deep, and I said to her that maybe the man in the book was said to have had a deep tone of speech, but she, seeming puzzled, said nay, and at that I questioned her the more, but only to the trouble of her memory and understanding. And strange must it seem that we two should talk on so trivial a matter, when there was so much else that we had need to exchange thought upon. For were a man in this present day to have speech with those who may live within that red planet of Mars, within the sky, scarce could the wonder of it exceed the wonder of a human voice coming through that night unto the great redoubt, out of all that lost darkness. For indeed this must have been the breaking of maybe 1,000,000 years of silence. And already, as I came to know later, was the news passing downward from city to city through all the vast pyramid, so that the hour slips were full of the news, and every city eager and excited and waiting. And I better known in that one moment than in all my life before. For that previous calling had been but vaguely put about, and then set to the count of a nature, blown upon over easily by spirit winds of the half-memory of dreams. Though it is indeed true, as I have set down before this, that my tales concerning the early days of the world, when the sun was visible and full of light, had gone down through all the cities, and had much comment and setting forth in the hour slips, and were a cause for speech and argument. Now concerning the voice of this girl coming to us through the darkness of the world, I will set out that which she had to tell. And this indeed but verified the tellings of our most ancient records, which had so long been treated over lightly. There was, it would seem, somewhere out in the lonesome dark of the outer lands, but at what distance none could ever discover, a second redoubt. That was a three-sided pyramid, and moderate small, being no more than 1 mile in height, and scarce 3/4 of a mile along the bases. When this redoubt was first builded, it had been upon the far shore of a sea, where now was no sea, and it had been raised by those wandering humans who had grown weary of wandering, and weary of the danger of night attacks by the tribes of half-human monsters which began to inhabit the earth even so early as the days when the half-gloom was upon the world. And he that had made the plan upon which it was builded was one who had seen the great redoubt, having lived there in the beginning, but escaped because of a correction set upon him for his spirit of irresponsibility, which had made him to cause disturbance among the orderly ones in the lowest city of the great redoubt. Yet, in time he too had come to be tamed by the weight of fear of the ever-growing hordes of monsters, and the forces that were abroad. And so he, being a master spirit, planned and builded the smaller redoubt, being aided thereto by 4 millions, who also were weary of the harass of the monsters, but until then had been wanderers, because of the restlessness of their blood. And they had chosen that place, because there they had discovered a sign of the earth current in a great valley which led to the shore. For without the earth current, no refuge could have existence. And whilst many builded and guarded, and cared for the great camp in which all lived, others worked within a great shaft, and in 10 years had made this to a distance of many miles, and therewith they tapped the earth current, but not a great stream, yet a sufficiency as was believed. And presently, after many years, they had builded the pyramid, and taken up their refuge there, and made them instruments, and ordained monstruacans, so that they had speech daily with the great pyramid, and thus for many long ages, and the earth current then to begin to fail. And though they labored through many thousands of years, they came to no better resource. And so it was, they ceased to have communication with the great redoubt, for the current had a lack of power to work the instruments, and the recording instruments ceased to be sensible of our messages. And thereafter came 1,000,000 years, maybe, of silence, with ever the birthing and marrying and dying of those lonesome humans. And they grew less, and some put this to the lack of the earth current, which dwindled slowly through the centuries of that eternity, and once in 1,000 years, maybe one among them would be sensitive and able to hear beyond ordinary, and to these at times there would seem to come the thrilling of the ether, so that such an one would go listening, and sometimes seem to catch half messages, and so awaken a great interest in all the pyramid. And there would be turning up of old records, and many words and writings, and attempts to send the master word through the night, in which doubtless sometimes they succeeded. For there was set down in the records of the great redoubt certain occasions on which there had come the call of the master word, which had been arranged and made holy between the two redoubts in the early days of that second life of this world. Yet, now for 100,000 years, there had been none sensitive, and in that time the people of the pyramid had become no more than 10,000. and the earth current was weak and powerless to put the joy of life into them, so that they went listlessly but deemed it not strange because of so many aeons of usage. And then, to the wonder of all, the earth current had put forth a new power, so that young people ceased to be old over soon, and there was happiness and a certain joy in the living, and a strange birthing of children, such as had not been through 500,000 years. And then came a new thing. Nani, the daughter of the master monstruaken of that redoubt, had shown to all that she was sensitive, for she had perceived odd vibrations afloat in the night. And concerning these she told her father, and presently, because their blood moved afresh in their bodies, they had hard to discover the plans of the ancient instruments. For the instruments had long rusted and been forgotten, and so they builded them a new instrument to send forth a message. For they had no memory at that time that the brain elements had power to do thus, though mayhap their brain elements were weakened through so many ages of starvation of the earth current, and could not have obeyed, even had their masters known all that we of the great redoubt knew. And when the instrument was finished, Nani was given the right to call first across the dark to discover whether indeed, after that 1,000,000 years of silence, they were yet companied upon this earth, or whether they were in truth lonely, the last poor thousands of the humans. And a great and painful excitement came upon the people of the lesser pyramid, for the loneliness of the world pressed upon them. And it was to them as though we in this age called to a star across the abyss of space. And because of the excitement and pain of the moment, Nani called only vaguely with the instrument into the dark. And lo, in a moment, as it seemed, there came all about her in the night the solemn throb of the master word, beating in the night. And Nani cried out that she was answered, and as may be thought, many of the people wept, and some prayed, and some were silent. But others beseeched her that she call again, and quickly to have further speech with those of their kind. And Nani spoke the master word into the night, and directly there came a calling all about her, Murdath! Murdath! And the strange wonder of it made her silent a moment. But when she would have made reply, the instrument had ceased to work, and she could have no further speech at that time. This, as may be thought, occasioned much distress, and constant work they had between the instrument and the earth current to discover the reason for this failing, but could not for a great while. And in that time, oft did Nani hear the call of Murdath thrilling about her. And twice there came the solemn beat of the master word in the night. Yet never had she the power to answer, and all that while, as I learned in time, was she stirred with a quaint ache at heart by the voice that called Murdath, as it might be the spirit of love searching for its mate. For this is how she put it. And thus it chanced that the constant thrilling of this name about her woke her to memory of a book she had read in early years and but half understood. For it was ancient and writ in an olden fashion, and it set out the love of a man and a maid, and the maid's name was Murdath. And so, because she was full of this great awakening of those ages of silence, and the calling of that name, she found the book again and read it many times, and grew to a sound love of the beauty of that tale. And presently, when the instrument was made right, she called into the night the name of that man within the book. And so it came about that I had hoped too much, yet even now was I strangely unsure whether to cease from hoping. And one other thing there is, which I would make clear. Many and oft a time had I heard a thrilling of sweet, faint laughter about me, and the stirring of the ether by words too gentle to come clearly. And these, I make no doubt, came from Nani, using her brain elements unwittingly and in ignorance, but very eager to answer my callings. And having no knowledge that, far off across the blackness of the world, they thrilled about me constantly. And after Nani had made clear all that I have set out concerning the lesser refuge, she told further how that food was not plentiful with them, though until the reawakening of the earth current they had gone unknowing of this, being of small appetite and caring little for aught. But now, wakened and newly hungry, they savoured a lack of taste in all that they ate. And this we could well conceive from our reasonings and theory, but happily not from our knowledge. And we said unto them that the soil had lost its life, and the crops therefrom were not vital. And a great while it would take for the earth within their pyramid to receive back the life elements. And we told them certain ways by which they might bring a more speedy life to the soil. And this they were eager to do, being freshly alive after so long a time of half-life. And now, you must know that in all the great redoubt the story went downwards swiftly, and was published in all the hour sheets with many comments. And the libraries were full of those who would look up the olden records, which for so long had been forgotten or taken, as we of this day would say, with a pinch of salt. And all the time I was pestered with questions, so that had I not been determined, I should scarce have been allowed to sleep. Moreover, so much was writ about me and my power to hear, and divers stories concerning tales of love, that I had been like to have grown mazed to take note of it all. Yet some note I did take, and much I found pleasant, but some displeasing, and for the rest I was not spoiled, as the saying goes, for I had my work to do. Moreover, I was always busied listening and having speech through the darkness, though if any saw me so, they would question. And because of this, I kept much to the tower of observation, where was the master monstruaken and a greater discipline. And then began a fresh matter, though but an old enough trick. For I speak now of the days that followed that reopening of the talk between the pyramids. Oft would speech come to us out of the night, and there would be tales of the sore need of the lesser redoubt, and callings for help. Yet when I sent the master word abroad, there would be no answering, and so I feared that the monsters and forces of evil knew. Yet at times the master word would answer to us, beating steadily in the night, and when we questioned afresh, we knew that they in the lesser redoubt had caught the beat of the master word, and so made reply. Though it had not been they who had made the previous talk, which we had sought to test by the word, and then they would make contradiction of all that had been spoken so cunningly, so that we knew the monsters and forces had sought to tempt some from the safety of the redoubt. Yet was this no new thing, as I have made to hint, saving that it grew now to a greater persistence. And there was a loathsome cunning in the using of this new knowledge to the making of wicked and false messages by those evil things of the nightland. And it told to us, as I have made remark, how that those monsters and forces had a full awareness of the speech between the pyramids. Yet could they have no power to say the master word. So had we some test left, and a way to sure knowledge of what made talk in the night. And all that I have told should bring to those of this age something of the yet unbegotten terror of that, and a quiet and sound thankfulness to God that we suffer not as humanity shall yet suffer. But for all this, let it not be thought that they of that age accounted it as suffering, but as no more than the usual of human existence. And by this may we know that we can meet all circumstances, and use ourselves to them and live through them wisely, if we be but prudent and consider means of invention. And through all the nightland there was an extraordinary awakening among the monsters and forces, so that the instruments made constant note of greater powers at work out there in the darkness. And the monstruakens were busied recording and keeping a very strict watch. And so was there at all that time a sense of difference and awakening, and of wonders about and to come. And from the country whence comes the great laughter, the laughter sounded constant, as it were an uncomfortable and heart-shaking voice thunder rolling thence over the lands, out from the unknown east, and the pit of the red smoke filled all the deep valley with redness, so that the smoke rose above the edge, and hid the bases of the towers upon the far side, and the giants could be seen plentiful around the kilns to the east, and from the kilns great belches of fire, though the meaning of it, as of all else, we could not say, but only the cause. And from the mountain of the voice, which rose to the southeast of the southeast watcher, and of which I have made no telling hitherto, in this faulty setting out, I heard for the first time in that life the calling of the voice, and though the records made mention of it, yet not often was it heard. And the calling was shrill and very peculiar and distressful and horrible. as though a giant woman hungering strangely shouted unknown words across the night. And this was how it seemed to me, and many thought this to describe the sound. And by all this may you perceive how that land was awakened, and other tricks there were to entice us into the nightland. And once a call came thrilling in the ether, and told to us that certain humans had escaped from the lesser redoubt and drew nigh to us, but were faint for food and craved succor. Yet when we sent the master word into the night, the creatures without could make no reply, which was a very happy thing for our souls. For we had been all mightily exercised in our hearts by this one message, and now had proof that it was but a trap. And constantly and at all hours I would have speech with Nani of the lesser redoubt, for I had taught her how she might send her thoughts through the night with her brain elements, but not to overuse this power, for it exhausts the body and the powers of the mind if it be abused by exceeding usage. Yet, despite that I had taught her the use of her brain elements, she sent her message always without strength, save when she had use of the instrument. And this I set to the cause, that she had not the health force needful. But apart from this, she had the night hearing very keen, and though less than mine. And so with many times of speech and constant tellings of our doings and thoughts, we drew near in the spirit to one another, and had always a feeling in our hearts that we had been given previous acquaintance, and this, as may be thought, thrilled my heart very strangely. Chapter 4. Hushing of the voice. Dearest, thine own feet tread the world at night, treading as moonflakes step across a dark, kissing the very dew to holier light. Thy voice a song past mountains, which to hark frightens my soul with an utter lost delight. Now, one night, towards the end of the 16th hour, as I made ready to sleep, there came all about me the thrilling of the ether, as happened oft in those days. But the thrilling had a strange power in it, and in my soul the voice of Nani sounded plain, all within and about me. Yet, though I knew it to be the voice of Nani, I answered not immediately, save to send the sure question of the master word into the night. And directly I heard the answer, the master word beating steadily in the night. And I questioned Nani why she had speech with me by the instrument at that time, when all were sleeping, and the watch set among the monstruacans. For they in the little pyramid had their sleep time to commence at the 11th hour, so that by this it was 5 hours advanced towards the time of waking. And Nani should have slept, nor have been abroad to the tower of observation, apart from her father. For I supposed that she spoke by the instrument, her voice sounding very clear in my brain. Yet to this question she made no answer in kind, but gave a certain thing into my spirit which set me trembling. For she said certain words that began, Dearest, thine own feet tread the world at night, and it well may be that she set me to tremble. For as the words grew about me, there wakened a memory dream, how that I had made these same words to Murdath the Beautiful in the long-gone eternity of this our age, when she had died and left me alone in all the world. And I was weak a little with the tumult and force of my emotion. But in a moment I called eagerly with my brain elements to Nani, to give some explaining of this thing that she had spoken to the utter troubling of my heart. Yet once more she made no direct answer, but spoke the words again to me across all the dark of the world. And it came to me suddenly that it was not Nani that spoke, but Murdath the Beautiful, from out of all the everlasting night. And I called Murdath with my brain elements into the night, and lo, the far, faint voice spoke again to my spirit through all the darkness of eternity, saying again those words. Yet though the voice was the voice of Murdath the Beautiful, it was also the voice of Nani. And I knew in all my heart that this thing was in verity, and that it had been given to me to be birthed once more into this world in the living time of that only one, with whom my spirit and essence hath mated in all ages through the everlasting. And I called with my brain elements and all my strength to Nani, but there came no answer, neither sign of hearing, though through hours I called. And thus at last I came to an utter exhaustion, but neither could be quiet nor sleep. Yet presently I slept, and when I waked, my first memory was of the wondrous thing which had befallen in the sleep time. For none in all this world could have known those words, save it had been the spirit of Murdath, my beautiful one, looking from above my shoulder in that utter lost time as I made those words to her, out of an aching and a broken heart. And the voice had been the voice of Murdath, and the voice of Murdath had been the voice of Nani. And what shall any say to this, save that which I had in my heart? And immediately I called to Nani once and again twice, and in a little moment there came all about me the throbbing of the master word, beating solemnly in the night. And I sent the master word to give assurance, and immediately the voice of Nani, a little weak, as was it always when she had not the instrument, but sent the message with her brain elements, and I answered her, and questioned her eagerly concerning her sayings of the past time of sleep. But she disclaimed, and made clear to me that she had no knowledge of having spoken, but had slept through all that time of which I made to tell, and indeed had dreamed a very strange dream, and for a little while I was confused and meditated, not knowing what to think, but came suddenly again to a knowledge that Nani's far voice was thrilling the ether all about, and that she would tell to me her dream, which had set strong upon her mind. And she told the dream to me, and in the dream she had seen a tall, dark man, built very big, and dressed in unfamiliar clothing. And the man had been in a little room, and very sorrowful and lonesome. And in her dream she had gone nigh to him, and presently the man made to write, that he might ease him by giving expression to his sorrow. And Nani had been able to read the words that he wrote, though to her waking spirit the language in which they were writ was strange and unknown. Yet she could not remember what he had writ, save but one short line, and this she had mind of in that he had writ the word Murdath above. And she spoke of the strangeness of this thing, that she should dream of this name, but supposed that I had fixed it upon her by my first callings. And then did I, with something of a tremble in my spirit, ask Nani to tell me what she remembered of the writing of that big, sorrowful stranger. And in a little moment, her far voice said these words all about me, "Dearest, thine own feet tread the world at night," but no more had she memory of. Yet it was a sufficiency. And I, maybe with a mad, strange triumph in my soul, said unto her with my brain elements that which remained of those words. And my spirit felt them strike upon the spirit of Nani, and awake her memory, as with the violence of a blow. And for a little while she stumbled, dumb before so much newness and certainty, and her spirit then to waken, and she near wept with the fright and the sudden new wonder of this thing, and immediately all about me there came her voice thrilling, and the voice was the voice of Murdath, and the voice of Nani. And I heard the tears of her spirit make pure and wonderful the bewildered and growing gladness of her far voice. And she asked me, as one who had suddenly opened the gates of memory, whether she might be truly Murdath. And I, utter weak and shaken strangely because of this splendor of fulfillment, could make no instant answer. And she asked again, but using mine old love name, and with a sureness in her far voice. And still I was so strangely dumb, and the blood to thud peculiar in mine ears, and this to pass, and speech to come swift, and this way to be that meeting of our spirits, across all the everlasting night. And you shall have for a memory picture how that Nani stood there in the world, in that far eternity, and with her spirit having speech with mine, looked back through the part-opened gates of her memory, into the past of this our life and age. Yet more than this she saw, and more than was given to me in that age. For she had memory now, and sight of other instances, and of other comings together, which had some confusion and but half meanings to me. Yet of this, our present age and life, we spoke as of some yesterday, but very hallowed. Now, as may be conceived, the wonder of this surety which had come into my life stirred me fiercely to its completion. For all my heart and spirit cried out to be with that one who was Murdath, and now spoke with the voice of Nayani. Yet how should this be won? For none among all the learned men of that mighty pyramid knew the position of the lesser redoubt. Neither could the records and histories of the world give us that knowledge. only that there was a general thought among the students and the monstrawakens that it lay between the northwest and the northeast. But no man had any surety, neither could any conceive of the distance from us of that refuge. And counting all this, there was yet the incredible danger and peril of the nightland, and the hunger and desolation of the outer lands, which were sometimes named the unknown lands. And I spoke much with Nani concerning this matter of their position, yet neither she nor her father, the master monstrawaken of that refuge, had any knowing either of our position, only that the builder of the lesser redoubt had come out of the southward world in the beginning, as they had knowledge of by the records. Also, the father of Nani set that ancient compass to bear, for as he made explanation to us through the instrument, so great a power of the earth current must be ours, that perchance it was our force which did affect the pointer from steadfastness. For indeed the needle did swing in an arc, as we heard, that held between the north and the south, within the westward arc, but this it had done ever with them, and so was a very helpless guide. Save that maybe, as we had thought, the force of the earth current that was with us had in truth some power to pull the needle towards us. And if this were so of verity, we made a reckoning that set the lesser redoubt to the north, and they did likewise and put us to the south. Yet was it all built upon the sand of guesswork, and nothing to adventure the life and soul upon, now we of curiosity, though 1,000,000 times had it been done in the past ages, set the compass before us, having it from the great museum. But as ever in that age, it did spin if we but stirred the needle, and would stop nowheres with surety. For the flow of the earth current from the crack beneath the pyramid had a power to affect it away from the north, and to set it wandering. And this may seem very strange to this present age, yet to that it was most true to the seeming nature of things, and harder to believe that ever it did once point steadfastly, to prove a guide of sureness and unfailing. For be it known, we knew the positions of the land by tradition, coming from that ancient time when, in the half-gloom, they had builded the pyramid. They having known the use of that ancient compass, and with sight of the sun, had named the positions, though we of that far future day had forgotten the very beginnings of those names of direction, and used them but because our fathers did 1,000,000 years and more. And likewise, we did the same with the names of the day and the night and the weeks and the months and the years, though of the visible markings of these there was nothing but only and always the everlasting night, yet the same seeming very natural to that people. Now Nani, having heed to my constant questions, craved with an utter keen hunger that I might come to her, but yet forbade it, in that it were better to live and commune in the spirit, than to risk my soul and mayhaps die in the foolishness of trying to find her in all the darkness of the dead world. Yet no heed had I taken of her commands, had I but known of a surety the direction in which she might be discovered, and gained some knowledge of the space between, for this might be named by thousands of miles, or but by hundreds, though a great distance it was surely. Yet one other thing there was that has point in this place. For when I sent my speech out into the night, using my brain elements, I came to know that, whether I had a knowledge of the north, or no knowledge at the moment, yet did I turn oft with a sure instinction to that direction. And of this the master monstrawaken took very great note, and had me to experiment many a time and way, and so enclosed about with screens, or with bandages across mine eyes, that I could not, save by that inward knowing, have any knowledge to point me the way. Yet would I turn northwards very frequent by a certain feeling, and seemed unable of speech if I were turned otherwise by force. But when we asked Nani whether she had an unusualness in this matter, she could discover none, and we could but take note curiously of that which affected my habits, and which truly I set to the attracting of her spirit. For I had mind that she did be somewheres out that way in the darkness of the world, but yet was this no more than to suppose, as you perceive, and the master monstrawaken wrote a study of this matter of the northwardness of my turning, and it was set out in the hour slips of the Tower of Observation, and so it came to be copied by the hour slips of the great cities, and made much comment and much calling up to me through the home instruments. So that with this, and the speech that went about concerning my powers to hear, I was much in talk, and diversely pleased and oft angered by overmuch attention and importunity. And now, whilst I pondered this matter in all my spirit and being, how that I should some way come to Nani, there befell a very terrible thing. And in this wise must I tell it. It was at the 17th hour, when all the millions of the mighty pyramids slept, that I was with the master monstrawaken in the tower of observation, taking my due turn. And sudden I heard the thrilling of the ether all about me, and the voice of Nani in my soul speaking. And I sent the master word into the darkness of the world. And presently I heard the solemn answer beating steadfastly in the night. And immediately I called to Nani with my brain elements to know what thing troubled her in her sleep. And her voice came into my spirit, weak and far and faint, and so that scarce I could make to hear the words. Yet in a while I gathered that all the peoples of the lesser redoubt were in very deadly trouble, for that the earth current had failed suddenly and mightily, and they had called her from her sleep, that she might listen whether we answered their callings by the instrument. But indeed no calling had come to us, and they who had been of late so joyful were now grown old with sorrow in but an hour or two. For they feared that the fresh coming of the earth current had been but the final flicker and outburst before the end. And even in this short while of our speech did it seem to me that the voice of Nani grew further off from me, and I felt like to have broken my heart with the trouble of this thing. And through all that remained of that sleep time did I converse with Nani, as might two lovers who shall presently part forever. And when the cities awoke, the news went throughout them, and all our millions were in sorrow and trouble. And thus was it for, maybe, a little month. And in that time had the voice of Nani grown so weak and far off that even I that had the night hearing could scarce make real its meaning. And every word was to me a treasure and a touch upon my soul. And my grief and trouble before this certain parting drove me that I could not eat, neither have rest. And this did the master monstrawaken take upon him to chide and correct. For that, if any were to help, how should it be done if I that had the night hearing, and heard even now that the recording instruments were dumb, came to ill health, and because of this and such wisdom as was mine, I made to eat and order my life that I might have my full powers. Yet was this beyond all my strength, for presently I knew that the people of the lesser pyramid were threatened by the monsters that beset them, and later I had knowledge from faint far words whispered in my brain that there had been a fight with an outside force that had harmed many in their minds. So that in madness they had opened the gate and had run from the lesser pyramid out into the darkness of the lands about them. And there had their physical bodies fallen to the monsters of those lands, but of their souls who may know. And this we set assuredly to the failure of the earth current, which had robbed them of all force and power, so that in those few weeks all life and joy of living had left them. And neither hunger nor thirst had they much, nor any great desire to live, but yet a new and mighty fear of death. And this doth seem very strange. And as may be thought, all this made the peoples of the great redoubt think newly of the earth current that issued from the crack beneath the pyramid, and of their latter end. So that much was writ in the hour slips concerning this matter, yet in the main to assure us that we ourselves might each be free from a disturbed heart, though some went foolishly to the other event, and spoke of a speedy danger to us likewise, as is ever the way. But the truth of our own case lay, maybe, somewhere between, and all the hour slips were full also of imaginings of the terror of those poor humans out in the darkness of the world, facing that end which must come upon all, even upon our mighty pyramid, though as most would believe, so far away in some future eternity that we have no cause to trouble. And there were sad poems writ to the peoples of that lesser redoubt, and foolish plans set about to rescue them, but none to put them to effect, and no way by which so great a thing might be done, and doth but show how loosely people will speak out of an over-security. Yet to me there had come a certain knowledge that I must make the adventure, though I achieved naught save mine own end. Yet it were better to cease quickly than that I should feel, as now I did feel. That same night, in the 18th hour, there was a great disturbance in the ether about the mighty pyramid, and I was awakened suddenly by the master monstrawaken, that I might use my gift of the night hearing to hearken for the throbbing of the master word, which they had thought to come vaguely through the instruments. But no one of the monstrawakens was sensitive enough of soul to account truly whether this was so. And lo, as I sat up in the bed, there came the sound of the master word beating in the night about the pyramid. And immediately there was a crying in the ether all about me, "We are coming, we are coming!" And mine inwards leaped and sickened me a moment, so shaken was I with a sudden belief. For the message seemed some ways to come to me from very near to the great redoubt, as that they who sent it were nigh to hand, and forthwith I called the master word into the night. But no answer did there come for a while, and then a faint thrilling of the ether about me, and the weak pulse of the master word in the night, sent by a far voice, strangely distant. And I knew that the voice was the voice of Nani, and I put a question through all the darkness of the dead world, whether she were within the lesser redoubt and safe thus far. And presently there came a faint disturbance about me, and a small voice in my soul, speaking weakly and out of an infinite distance. And I knew that far away through the night, Nani spoke feebly with her brain elements, and that she abode within the lesser pyramid, but that she too had heard that strange pulse of the master word in the night, and that message, "We are coming, we are coming." And vastly had this thing disturbed her, waking her within her sleep, so that she knew not what to think, save that we were devising some method to come to them. But this I removed from doubt, saying that she must not build on vain hoping, for I would not have her doubly tortured by the vanity of such believing. And thereafter, having said such things as I might, though few they were to comfort her, I bade her gently to sleep, and turned therewith to the master monstrawaken, who waited in quiet patience, and had no knowledge of that which I had heard and sent. For his hearing was but the normal, though his brain and heart were such as made me to love him. And I told the master monstrawaken many things as I put my clothing about me, how that there had indeed been the calling of the master word, but not by any of that lesser redoubt, but that, to my belief, it had come from nigh about the great pyramid. Moreover, it was sent by no instrument, as I wotted that he did guess, but as it seemed to me, by the brain elements of many calling in unison. And all this did I set out to the master monstrawaken, and with something uncertain of fear and trouble in my heart, yet with a blind expectation, as indeed who would not, though no longer was I shaken by that first thought of her nearness. And I said to the master monstrawaken that we should go to the tower of observation, and search the nightlands with the great spyglass. And we did this, and lo, presently we saw a great number of men pass over the electric circle that went about the pyramid. Yet they came not to us, but went outwards towards the blackness and the strange fires and hideous mysteries of the nightland. And we ceased from spying, and looked swiftly at one another, and knew in our hearts that some had left the mighty pyramid in the sleep time. Then the master monstrawaken sent word to the master watchman that his wardership had been outraged, and that people left the great pyramid in the sleep time. For this was against the law, and none ever went out into the nightland, save the full watch were posted to the great door, and at a due time, when all were wakeful. For the opening of the door was made known to all the millions of the great redoubt, so that all might be aware, and know that no foolishness was done without their wotting. Moreover, ere any had power to leave the pyramid, they must pass the examination and be prepared. And some of this have I set out already. And so stern was the framing of the law, that there were yet the metal pegs upon the inner side of the great gate, where had been stretched the skin of one who disobeyed, and was flayed, and his hide set there to be a warning in the early days. Yet the tradition was remembered, For, as I might say it, we lived very close about the place, and memory had no room whereby she might escape. Now the master watchman, when he heard that which the master monstrawaken had to tell, went hastily with some of the central watch from the watch dome to the great gate, and he found the men of the sleep-time watch, with the warder of the gate, all bound and stopped in the mouth, so that none could make outcry. And he freed them, and learned that nigh 500 young men, from the upper cities, by the bigness of their chests, had come upon them suddenly and bound them, and escaped into the night through the eye gate in the top of the great gate. And the master watchman was angry, and demanded why that none had called by the instruments of the watch-house. But lo, some had made to call thus, and found them unable to wake the recorders, which lay in the central watch dome. For there had been tampering. Now after this, they made certain new rules and laws concerning the order of watching, and made tests of the lesser instruments of the inward pyramid, nightly upon the coming of the sleep time, which was, even in that strange age, by tradition called the night, as I have given hint, though hitherto, until the way of my story was known, I have used a word for the sleep hours that was yet not of that time, but somewhat an invention, to make this history free from the confusion of night and day, when in truth it was always night without upon the world. Yet after this shall I keep to mine use the luxury of the true names of that time. And yet how strange is it that the truth should be of so little to our thinking, and so to go forward with my telling. For though all this care were now taken, it had no force until afterward. And at this moment were those poor foolish youths out in all the danger of the nightland, and no way by which they might be succored or called back, save that fear or wisdom should come to them quickly, that they cease from so wild an attempt. For it was to make rescue of those in that other unknown pyramid, out in all the darkness of the world's night, that was their intent, as we had speedy knowledge from those boon friends that had been in the secret of their plot, which had seemed to them great and heroic, and was so in verity, but that neither they who went nor they who stayed had a true awareness of the danger they had dealing with, being all naught but raw and crude youths. Yet doubtless, with the makings of many fine and great men among them, and because some had thus abetted that which they knew to be against the law, which was framed to the well-being and safety of all, there were certain floggings, which might the better help their memories in the future as to the properness of their actions and wisdom. Moreover, they who returned, if any, would be flogged as seemed proper after due examination. And though the news of their beatings might help all others to hesitation, ere they did foolishly, in like fashion, yet was the principle of the flogging not on this base, which would be both improper and unjust, but only that the one in question be corrected to the best advantage for his own well-being. For it is not meet that any principle of correction should shape to the making of human signposts of pain for the benefit of others. For in verity, this were to make one pay the cost of many's learning, and each should owe to pay only so much as shall suffice for the teaching of his own body and spirit. And if others profit thereby, this is but accident, however helpful. And this is wisdom, and denoteth now that a sound principle shall prevent practice from becoming monstrous. Yet now I must hasten that I set down how it fared with those 500 youths that had made so sad an adventure of their lives and unprepared souls, and were beyond our aid to help them, who might not so much as make any calling to them, to bid them to return. For to do this would have been to tell to all the monsters of the land that humans were abroad from the mighty pyramid. And this would have been to cause the monsters to search the youths out to their destruction, and maybe even to awaken the forces to work them some dread spiritual harm, which was the chief fear, now presently. Through all the cities of the great redoubt, the news had gone how that 500 foolish youths had adventured out into the despair of the nightland. And the whole pyramid waked to life, and the peoples of the south came to the northern sides, for the great gate lay in the northwest side. And the youths had made from there, not straightly outwards, but towards the north, and so were to be seen from the northeast embrasures, and from those within the northwest wall. And thus, in a while were they watched by all the mighty multitudes of the Great Pyramid through millions of spyglasses. For each human had a spying glass, as may be thought, and some were 100 years old, and some maybe 10,000, and handed down through many generations, and some but newly made and very strange. But all those people had some instrument by which they might spy out upon the wonder of the nightland. For so had it been ever through all the eternity of darkness, and a great diversion and wonder of life was it to behold the monsters about their work, and to know that they plotted always to our destruction, yet were ever foiled. And never did all that great and terrible land grow stale upon the soul of any, from birth until death. And by this you shall know the constant wonder of it, and that sense of enemies in the night about us, which ever filled the heart and spirit of all beholders, so that never were the embrasures utterly empty. Yet many beheld not the land from the embrasures, but sat about the view tables, which were set properly in certain places throughout the cities, and so beheld the nightland without undue cranings or poising of spyglasses, though less plain seen. And these same tables were some form of that which we of this age name camera obscura, but made very great, and with inventions, and low to the floor, so that 10,000 people might sit about them in the raised galleries and have comfortable sight. Yet this attracted not the young people, save they were lovers. And then, in truth, were they comfortable seats for quietness and gentle whisperings. Yet now, as may be supposed, with all the peoples of the mighty pyramid grown eager to look towards one part of the nightland, the embrasures were hid in the crowds, and such as could gain no view therethrough thronged about the view tables. And so was it in all the hours of leisure, so that women had scarce patience to attend their children, but must hasten to watch again that lonesome band of foolish youths, making so blind and unshaped a trial to come upon that unknown lesser redoubt, somewhere out in all the night of the world. And in this wise passed 3 days and nights. Yet both in the sleep time and the time of waking did great multitudes cease not to watch, so that many went hungry for sleep, as in truth did I. And sometimes we saw those youths with plainness, but other times they were lost to our sight in the utter shadows of the nightland. Yet, by the telling of our instruments and the sense of my hearing, there was no awareness among the monsters and the forces of evil that any were abroad from the pyramid, so that a little hope came into our hearts that yet there might be no tragedy. And times would they cease from their way and sit about in circles among the shadows and the grey moss bushes, which grew hardly here or there about, and we knew that they had food with them to eat. For this could we see with plainness, as some odd, grim flare of light from the infernal fires struck upon one or another strangely, and passed, and left them in the darkness. And who of you shall conceive what was in the hearts of the fathers and the mothers that bore the youths, and who never ceased away from the northward embrasures, but spied out in terror and in tears, and maybe oft with so good glasses as did show them the very features and look upon the face of sun and sun. And the kin of the watchers brought to them food, and tended them so that they had no need to cease from their watching. And beds were made in the embrasures, rough and resourceful, that they might sleep quickly a little, yet be ever ready, if those cruel monsters without made discovery of those their children. Thrice in those 3 days of journeying to the northward did the youth sleep, and we perceived that some kept a watch, and so knew that there was a kind of order and leadership among them. Also they had each his weapon upon his hip, and this gave to us a further plea to hope. And concerning this same carrying of weapons, I can but set out here that no healthful male or female in all the mighty pyramid but possessed such a weapon, and was trained to it from childhood, so that a ripe and extraordinary skill in the use thereof was common to most. Yet some breaking of rule had there been, that the youths had each achieved to be armed, for the weapons were stored in every 10th house of the cities in the care of the charging masters, and here I must make known that these weapons did not shoot, but had a disc of grey metal, sharp and wonderful, that spun in the end of a rod of grey metal, and were some ways charged by the earth current, so that were any but stricken thereby, they were cut in twain so easy as aught. And the weapons were contrived to the repelling of any army of monsters that might make to win entrance to the redoubt. And to the eye they had somewhat the look of strange battle axes, and might be lengthened by the pulling out of the handles. Now the youths made, as I have told, to the northward, but had first to keep a long way to the northeast, that they might come clear of the veil of red fire. And this wise they journeyed, and kept the veil about 7 miles to the northwest of them, and so were presently beyond the watcher of the northeast, and going with a greater freedom, and having less care to hide. And this way, it may be, certain of the giants wandering perceived them, and went swiftly to make attack and destroy them. But some order went about among the youths, and they made a long line with a certain space between each, because of the terror of their weapon. And immediately it seemed the giants were upon them. 67 they were, and seeming to be haired like to mighty crabs, as I saw with the great spyglass, when the great flares of far and mighty fires threw their fierce light across the dark lands. And there was a very great and horrid fight. For the youths broke into circles about each of the giants, and many of those young men were torn in pieces. But they smote the monsters from behind and upon every side, and we of the mighty pyramid could behold at times the grey, strange gleam of their weapons. And the jether was stirred about me by the passing of those that died. Yet by reason of the great miles, their screams came not to us, neither heard we the roars of the monsters. But into our hearts, even from that great distance and safety, there stole the terror of those awesome brutes. And in the great spyglass I could behold the great joints and limbs, and e'en, I thought, the foul sweat of them. And their size and brutishness was like to that of odd and monstrous animals of the olden world, yet part human. And it must be borne to mind that the fathers and the mothers of those youths beheld all this dread fight from the embrasures, and their other kin likewise watched, and a very drear sight was it to their hearts and their human natural feelings, and like to breed old age ere its due. Then in a time the fight ceased. For of those 27 giant brutes there remained none, only that there cumbered the ground 27 lumbering hillocks, dreadful and grim. For the lesser dead we could not see proper, and we that were within the pyramid saw the youth sorted together by their leaders, all in the dim twilight of that place. And with the great spyglass I made a rough count, and found that there lived of them 300. And by this shall you know the power of those few monstrous things, which had slain full 200, though each youth was armed with so wondrous a weapon. And I set the word through the pyramid, that all might have some knowledge of the number that had died. For it was better to know than to be in doubt. And no spyglass had the power of the great spyglass. After this fight, the youths spent a time having a care to their bodies and wounds, and some were made separate from the others, and of these I counted upon 50. And whilst the others made to continue their march towards the road where the silent ones walk, these were constrained by one who was the leader to return to the pyramid. And in a little I saw that they came towards us, wearily and with many a halt, as that they suffered great wounds and harm of the fight. But those others, maybe 250 youths, went onwards into the nightland. And though we sorrowed at this thing, yet was there come a huge pride into our hearts, that those raw ones, who yesterday were but children, had so held themselves in the battle, and done a great deed that day. And I wot that whilst their mothers wept easeless, their fathers' hearts swelled within them, and held somewhat of their pain away from them for a time. And all this while those wounded youths came slowly, and rested and came on again, the better helping the worse. And a great excitement and trouble there was in all the mighty pyramid, to learn which were they that came, and they that went, and who lay out there quietly among the slain. But none might say anything with surety, for even with that great spyglass in the tower of observation, they were not overplain. save when some light from the fires of the land flared high and lit them. For they stood not up into the glare of the fires, as had the giants. And though I saw them with clearness, yet I knew them not. For there was so mighty a multitude in that vast redoubt, that none might ever know the half even of their rulers. And about this time there came a fresh matter of trouble to our minds. For one of the monstruations made report that the instruments were recording an influence abroad in the night, so that we had knowledge that one of the evil forces was out. And to me there came an awareness that a strange unquiet stole over the land. Yet I knew it not with mine ears, but my spirit heard, and it was as though trouble and an expectation of horror did swarm about me. And once, listening, I heard the master word beating strangely low, and I knew the ether to thrill about me, and a faint stirring was there in my soul, as of a faint voice speaking, and I knew that Nani called to me some message across the night of the world, yet weak and coming without clear meaning, so that I was tormented and could but send comfort to her with my brain elements. And presently I knew that she ceased to speak, and later I heard that there was a new matter forward in the redoubt. For 10,000 men had assembled to attend the room of preparation for the short preparation. And by this we knew that those poor youths who stumbled towards us through the dark were presently to have help. And through all that sleep time, there went forward the spiritual and the physical preparation of the 10,000. And upon the morrow they slept, whilst 100,000 made ready their arms. And in this space of time, the 250 youths that went towards the road where the silent ones walk had come very nigh thereto, having gone very warily and with some slowness, because, as may be, of the lesson of the giants, and to us in the pyramid, the instruments made known constantly that influence which was abroad, and which all those of the Tower of Observation thought to proceed from the House of Silence. Yet nothing could we see with the great spyglass, and so could come to no sure knowing, but only to fear and wonder. And presently the youths were upon the great road, and turned to the northward. And beyond them a great way stood the House of Silence, upon a low hill at a certain distance to the right of the road. By now they that were wounded had come to within, maybe 15 miles of the great redoubt, and the news went through all the cities that the 10,000 men that were prepared made to arm themselves. And I went down by the tower lift, and saw them come down by thousands from the room of preparation, and none might go nigh to them, or cause them to speak, for they were made ready, and were, as it might be, holy. And all the millions of the mighty pyramid stood in their cities about certain of the main lifts, and watched those thousands go downwards, all in their armor of grey metal, and each one armed with the discos, which was that same very terrible weapon, which all had training to. And I doubt not but that the young men of the pyramid looked, with longing in their hearts, that they might have been among those that went forth to succor. Yet the older men had graver thoughts in their hearts, for the blood ran more soberly in them, and they had knowledge and memory of the peril. And by this I would make clear that I speak less of the peril of the body, which is common to every state of life, but of the peril of the spirit. And it may be thought by those of this age that it was most strange that they of that having all the knowledge of eternity to aid them, had no weapon by which to shoot and kill at a distance. But indeed, this had not been so in the past, as our histories did show, for some wondrous weapons there had been, that might slay without sound or flash at a full score miles and more, and some we had whole within the great museum, and of others but the parts in decay, for they had been foolish things and reckless to use. For we of that great pyramid wanted not to kill a few of the monsters that lay at a great distance, but only those which came nigh to harm us. And concerning those same weapons that killed silently at a great distance, we had now little knowledge, save that they did waste the earth current, and no practice had we concerning their workings. For it was, maybe, 100,000 years gone that they had been used, and found to be of no great worth in a close attack, and harmful otherwise to the peace, in that they angered unneedful the forces of that land, slaying wantonly those monsters which did no more than beset the mighty redoubt at a great distance. For as may be seen by a little thought, we did very gladly keep a reasonable quietness, and refrained from aught that should wake that land. For we were born to the custom of that strange life, and lived and died in peace for the most part, and were very content to have security, and to be neutral in all things that did not overbear us, but as it were, always armed and ready. But concerning the great and evil forces that were abroad in the nightland, these we had no power to harm, nor could we hope for more than that we had security from them, which indeed we had. But the hugeness of their power was about us, and we dared not to wake it, save through such extremity as had come to pass by this folly of the youths. Though even now we had no thought to attack aught, but only to succor those wounded ones. And concerning this simplicity of weapons, which excites somewhat even my wonder in this our present age, it may be that the powers of chemistry were some ways quaintly limited by conditions in that age, and there to be always a need to spare the earth current, and hence, by this cause and by that, we were brought by the extreme nigh to the simplicity of the early world, yet with a strange and mighty difference, as all may know who have read. Now presently the word was sent to every city throughout the great redoubt, as was the law, that the great gate should be opened. And each city sent its master to form the full watch, as was the law. And each went clad in grey armour, and carrying the discos. And the full watch numbered 2,000, for there were also the watchmen. Then the lights in the great causeway were made dim, so that the opening of the gate should cast no great glare from within into the nightland, to tell the watcher of the northwest and all the monsters that certain humans went out from the mighty pyramid. But whether the vast and hidden forces of evil had knowledge, we knew not. And they who went must but chance it, remembering that they were prepared and had the capsule. And the 10,000 that were prepared went out through the great gateway into the night. And the full watch stood back from them and spoke no word, but saluted silently with the discos. And they that went raised each the discos a little, and passed out into the dark. Then the great gate was shut, and we made to wait and to watch, with trouble and expectation within our hearts. And at the embrasures many did comfort the women of those men. And I went back upwards by miles, until I came to the tower of observation. And I looked out from there into the nightland, and saw that the 10,000 halted at the circle, and made arrangement of themselves, and sent some before and upon either hand, and so went forward into the nightland. And after that I went to the great spyglass, and turned it towards the 250 youths that were far off, upon the road where the silent ones walk. Yet for a while I could not perceive them, for all the road seemed empty. But afterward I saw them, and they were clambering back into the road, having gone aside, as I thought, because of the passing of one of those silent ones, that I saw now at a distance to the southward of them. There passed then some 3 hours, and in that time I varied my watching between those far-off youths, and the 10,000 that went forward to succor the wounded, that were now maybe scarce 9 miles distant from the mighty pyramid. And the 10,000 came very close to them, and in truth, in a little while they spied one the other, and I gathered in spirit something of the rejoicing of those youths. Yet weak and troubled were they because of their wounds, and their knowledge of failure, and their disobedience of the law. And presently they were surrounded by the 10,000, and carried upon slings, and all that body swung round towards the pyramid, and came back at a great pace. And in the same time I heard the sound that made them so swift to hasten, for there smote up through the night the baying of the hounds. And we knew that they were discovered. And I swept the great spyglass over the land towards the valley of the hounds, that I might discover them quickly. And I saw them come lumbering at a strange gallop, and great as horses. And it might be only 10 miles to the east. And I looked once upon the watcher of the northeast, and I saw and marveled that the great Belia quivered constantly. And I knew that it had knowledge, and gave signal to all the land. Then did one of the monstrawakens report that a new and terrible influence was abroad in the land. and by the instrument we had knowledge that it approached. And some of the monstrawakens called foolishly with weak voices to the 10,000 to haste, forgetting and desiring only their safety from that which came near. Then, looking with the great spyglass, I saw that there moved across the land, from the direction of the plain of blue fire, a mighty hump, seeming of black mist, and came with prodigious swiftness. And I called to the master monstrawaken, that he come and look through one of the eyepieces that were about the great spyglass. And he came quickly, and when he had looked a while, he called to the monstrawaken that had made report. And the monstrawaken answered, and replied that the influence drew nearer by the reading of the instrument. Yet of the thing itself the man had no sight, and I ceased not to look, and in a little while the humped thing passed downwards into the veil of red fire, which lay across the land that way. But I watched steadfastly, and presently I saw the black hump climb up from the veil of red fire upon this side, and come through the night, so that in scarce a minute it had come halfway across that part of the night land, and my heart stood quiet with fear, and the utter terror of this monster, which I knew to be surely one of the great forces of evil of that land, and had power without doubt to destroy the spirit. And the master monstrawaken leapt towards the home call, and sent the great sound down to the 10,000, that they might attend. And immediately he signaled to them to beware. Yet already I perceived that they knew of this utter danger that was upon them, for I saw them slay the youths quickly, that their spirits might not be lost. For they were unprepared, but the men, being prepared, had the capsule, and would die swiftly in the last moment. I looked again towards the hump, and saw that it came like a hill of blackness in the land, and was almost anigh. Then there happened a wonder. For in that moment, when all had else gone quickly, that they might save their souls, out of the earth there rose a little light, like to the crescent of the young moon of this early day. And the crescent rose up into an arch of bright and cold fire, glowing but little. And it spanned above the 10,000 and the dead. And the hump stood still, and went backwards, and was presently lost. And the men came swiftly towards the mighty pyramid. Yet ere they were come to safety, the baying of the hounds sounded close upon them, and they faced to the danger. Yet as I could know without despair, because that they yet lived after so enormous a peril. And the hounds were very nigh, as now I beheld with the great spyglass. And I counted 50, running with mighty heads low, and in a pack. And lo, as the hounds came at them, the 10,000 drew apart, and had a space between the men, that they might have full use of that terrible discos. And they fought with the handles at length, and I saw the discs spin and glisten and send out fire. Then was there a very great battle, for the light that arched above them, and held away the power from their souls, made not to protect them from this danger of the lesser monsters. And at 100,000 embrasures within the mighty pyramid, the women cried and sobbed, and looked again. And in the lower cities it was told after, that the peoples could hear the crash and splinter of the armor, as the hounds ran to and fro, slaying, aye, even the sound of the armor between their teeth. Yet the 10,000 ceased not to smite with the discos, and they hewed the hounds in pieces. But of the men that went forth, there were 1,700 slain by the hounds, ere the men won to victory. Then came that wearied band of heroes back to the home shelter of the vast redoubt, and they bore their dead with them, and the youths that they slew. And they were received with great honor, and with exceeding grief, and in a great silence. For the thing admitted not of words, until a time had passed. And in the cities of the pyramid there was mourning, for there had been no sorrow like unto this through mayhap 100,000 years. And they bore the youths to their mothers and to their fathers. And the father of each made thanks to the men that they had saved the soul of his son. But the women were silent, yet neither to the father nor to the mother was ever made known the name of the slayers. For this might not be, as all shall see with a little thought. And some did remember that in verity all was due to the unwisdom of those youths, who had heeded not the law and their life teachings. Yet had they paid to the uttermost and passed outwards, and the account of their deeds was closed. And all this while did great numbers spy toward the road where the silent ones walk, that they might watch that band of youths afar in the nightland, who went forward amid those horrid dangers. Yet when the dead youths had been brought in, many had ceased to look out for a time, and had turned to questioning, and some had made inspection that they might know which had come back, and which lay out there where the giants had slain them, or went forward to more dreadful matters. But who of those that were abroad were slain or still went onward, we had but indifferent knowledge, though the men of the 10,000 knew somewhat, having had speech with the wounded youths ere they slew them. And as may be thought, these men were sorely questioned by the mothers and the fathers of those youths that were not accounted of. Yet I doubt that few had much knowledge wherewith to console them. Now there was presently in the Garden of Silence, which was the lowermost of all the underground fields, the ending of those 1,700 heroes and of the youths that they saved and slew. And the garden was a great country, and 100 miles every way, and the roof thereof was 3 great miles above, and shaped to a mighty dome, as it had been that the builders and makers thereof did remember in their spirits the visible sky of this our present age. And the making of that country was all set out in a single history of 7,070 volumes. And there were likewise 7,070 years spent to the making of that country, so that there had unremembered generations lived and labored and died, and seen not the end of their labor. And love had shaped it and hallowed it, so that of all the wonders of the world, there has been none that shall ever come anigh to that country of silence, 100 miles every way of silence to the dead. And there were in that roof 7 moons set in a mighty circle, and lit by the earth current, and the circle was 60 miles across, so that all that country of quiet was visible, yet to no great glare, but a sweet and holy light, so that I did always feel in my heart that a man might weep there, and be unashamed. And in the midst of that silent country there was a great hill, and upon the hill a vast dome, and the dome was full of a light that might be seen in all that country, which was the Garden of Silence. And beneath the dome was the crack, and within it the glory of the earth current, from which all had life and light and safety. And in the dome at the north there was a gateway, and a narrow road went upward to the gateway, and the road was named the Last Road, and the gateway was named by no name, but known to all as the Gateway. And there were in that mighty country long roadways and hidden methods to help travel, and constant temples of rest along the miles, and groves, and the charm of water falling, and everywhere the statues of memory and the tablets of memory, and the whole of that great underground country, full of an echo of eternity and of memory and love and greatness, so that to walk alone in that land was to grow back to the wonder and mystery of childhood, and presently to go upwards again to the cities of the mighty pyramid, purified and sweetened of soul and mind. And in my boyhood I have wandered oft a week of days in that country of silence, and had my food with me, and slept quietly amid the memories, and gone on again, wrapped about with the quiet of the everlasting. And the man-soul within would be drawn mightily to those places where the great ones of the past eternity of the world had their memory named. But there was that within me which ever drew me, in the ending, to the hills of the babes, those little hills where might be heard amid the lonesomeness of an utter quiet, a strange and wondrous echo, as of a little child calling over the hills. But how this was I know not, save by the sweet cunning of some dead maker in the forgotten years. And here, mayhaps by reason of this voice of pathos, were to be found the countless tokens of memory to all the babes of the mighty pyramid, through 1,000 ages. And odd whiles would I come upon some mother, sitting there lonely or mayhaps companied by others. And by this little telling shall you know somewhat of the quietness and the wonder and the holiness of that great country, hallowed to all memory and to eternity and to our dead. And it was here, into the country of silence, that they brought down the dead to their burial, And there came down into the country of silence maybe 100 million, out of the cities of the pyramid, to be present and to do honor. Now they that had charge of the dead did lay them upon the road which ran up unto the gateway, even that same road which was named the last road. And the road moved upward slowly with the dead, and the dead went inward through the gateway, first the poor youths, and afterward they that had given up life that they might save them. And as the dead went upwards, there was a very great silence over all the miles of the country of silence. But in a little while there came from afar off a sound as of a wind wailing, and it came onwards out of the distance, and passed over the hills of the babes, which were a great way off, and so came anigh to the place where I stood. Even as the blowing of a sorrowful wind did it come, and I knew that all the great multitudes did sing quietly, and the singing passed onwards, and left behind it an utter silence, even as the wind doth rustle the corn, and pass onwards, and all fall to a greater seeming quietness than before. And the dead passed inward through the gateway into the great light and silence of the dome, and came out no more. And again, from beyond the far hills of the babes, there was that sound of the millions singing, and there rose up out of the earth beneath the voices of the underground organs. And the noise of the sorrow passed over me, and went again into the distance, and left all hushed. And lo, as there passed inward to the silence of the dome, the last of those dead heroes, there came again the sound from beyond the hills of the babes. And as it came more nigh, I knew that it was the song of honor, loud and triumphant, and sung by countless multitudes. And the voices of the organs rose up into thunder from the deep earth. And there was a great honor done to the glory of the dead. And afterwards, once more a silence. Then did the peoples of the cities arrange themselves, so that from every city whence had come a hero, were the people of that city gathered together. And when they were so gathered, they set up tokens of memory to the dead of their city. But afterwards did charge artists to the making of sculpture great and beautiful to that same end, and now did but place tablets against that time. And afterwards the people did wander over that country of silence, and made visit and honor to their ancestors, if such were deserving. And presently the mighty lifts did raise them all to the cities of the pyramid. And thereafter there was something more of usualness, save that ever the embrasures were full of those that watched the youths afar upon the great road. And in this place I to remember how that our spyglasses had surely some power of the earth current to make greater the impulse of the light upon the eye. And they were like no spyglass that ever you did see, but oddly shaped, and to touch both the forehead and the eyes, and gave wonderful sight of the land. But the great spyglass to be beyond all this, for it had the eyes of it upon every side of the mighty pyramid, and did be truly an huge machine. And to me, as I went about my duties, or peered forth through the great spyglass at the youths upon the road where the silent ones walk, there came at times a far faint thrilling of the ether, so that sometimes I was aware that there was the beating of the master word in the night, but so strange and weak that the instruments had no wotting of it. And when this came, then would I call back through all the everlasting night to Nani, who was indeed Murdath, and I would send the master word with my brain elements, and afterwards such comfort as I might. Yet hard and bitter was the truth of my helplessness and weakness, and the utter terror and might of the evil forces and monsters of the nightland, so that I was like to have brake my heart with pondering. And the silence would come again, and anon the weak thrilling of the ether, but no more the far voice speaking in my soul,